Deschutes County Board of County Commissioners on Wednesday, September 28, 2022. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and now is the time for citizen input. And I believe we have two members of our audience that would like to please speak at this time. I'll call Maggie O'Sullivan first. And you'll come up to the microphone, identify yourself, and then you have 3 minutes in which to speak. So it's Maggie first.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning, County Commissioners. My name is Maggie O'Sullivan. I'm a junior at Bend Senior High School, and I've come to broach the topic of the destruction of Worrell Park on behalf of the Green Leadership Coalition. Growing up in Bend has given me a deep connection with the natural spaces that surround us, a connection that many other Bend locals can relate to. As a child, I participated in the classic Bend activities, skiing, hiking, exploring in the woods, and swimming in the Deschutes. However, in recent years, I've noticed these activities I was once able to enjoy consistently are being affected by global warming and, more importantly, human impact. Our ski seasons have become shorter and less predictable, water levels in the Crooked River have dropped to the lowest they've been since 1961, and wildfires are tearing through our forests like it's nobody's business. But I'm not here to talk about climate change, as I'm sure you've also noticed these changes within our community. I'm here to talk about the big picture. The big picture that dictates my future, that dictates Olive's future, that dictates your children's and grandchildren's future. It begins with the removal of one park, then it's two, and soon Bend is just like all the other cookie-cutter towns which remove all character from the original location. While I know this is an exaggeration, my point is that this is a turning point at which Bend needs to decide, will we take this situation as an opportunity to recognize our natural spaces and start taking initiative in their protection, or will we continue to be profit and cost oriented in the decisions we make? In this instance, you are placing a value upon Worrell Park, a value that says, you're worth less to us than 68 parking spaces. What kind of message does this send to a town like Bend, a town full of adventurers, full of nature lovers, full of kind-hearted people who love their home? What kind of message does it send to Bend's youth? It sends the message that human development is somehow more important than the protection of the earth, of their home. And so I implore you and your conscience to think of the future. I understand it can be hard to think of the long-term implications when the short-term benefits are more easily achievable. When I was younger and my family used to go on hikes, my brother and I would find a cool rock or a flower, but my parents always told us to leave it so the next person can enjoy it. And so now I will end with this. Will you leave Worrell Park so the next people, so the next generation can enjoy it? We ask that you take the Worrell Park option off the table. Thank you.
Maggie, you timed that perfectly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
For joining us today.
There might be, if I could just say, I'm guessing there might be some more Worrell Park comments. So I'll save my comments on Worrell Park until the end of those, but I do have some. And I also wanted to just say that you referenced the big picture, and I fully agree that we need to be thinking about the big picture. And I would encourage you, if you have time, to stick around for the remainder of the meeting, where we'll be considering the fates of some pretty significant sized properties in the rural county that essentially we'll be considering conversion of those lands from open space and exclusive farm use to rural industrial and rural residential uses. And these are, again, a 19-acre and a 710-acre property, so pretty significant in terms of the impacts for the big picture for our community.
Okay, and Olive Nye, please. And you do have 3 minutes. There is a timer somewhere.
County Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Olive Nye, and I'm a senior at Bend High School. I'm the co-leader of the Green Leadership Coalition, a group of local students pushing for sustainability. I value Bend's remaining green spaces, places that provide both habitat for plants and animals and a sanctuary for people. Places where we can take a break from the urban environment and reconnect with nature. Worrell Park is one of these spaces. Bend is known for its clear rivers, snowy mountains, and plentiful parks and nature reserves. Worrell Park, formed 75,000 years ago, is part of what makes Bend a spectacular city and a place thousands of people visit each year. Worrell Park's high desert character differs from nearby parks with manicured landscapes and is one of the last standing lava flows in our walkable downtown. Worrell reminds us of our geological history and is an important educational reference for our Central Oregon ecosystem. We need to switch our thinking from cost to value. County Commissioners, I understand your decision. This is a difficult issue, and there are many stakeholders to consider. But I ask that you consider one stakeholder in particular, our future. This decision affects not only our generation, but those to come. We want our children to find joy in the same places we did when we grew up. Flattening this park will take away another one of the few remaining places in our urban center where kids can see marmots, watch butterflies pollinate, and learn about different species of native trees. Though there will be green space in the renovated design, the existing biodiversity will be destroyed. Bend must develop sustainably to support the growing population and to ensure a healthy future for its citizens. The renovation of Worrell Park will provide 68 parking spots, but the park will be lost forever. This is not sustainable development. It is a temporary solution. We are experiencing an environmental crisis worldwide, and cities around the globe are pushing to incorporate green space into urban areas. Parks like Worrell are becoming more valued each day as we learn more about how greenery can mitigate climate change and the significant health benefits time outdoors can provide. We need to reconsider how we develop and how we provide for our citizens. Flattening Worrell is against the direction we should be moving. This is not an issue just a few of us young people care about. We have gathered 335 signatures on a petition we have shared with our peers. Present and future voters value Worrell Park and want to see it preserved. We ask that you pursue a more comprehensive, forward-thinking solution and take the Worrell Park option off the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Olive. Thank you for coming today. We appreciate you coming and sharing your message. It's part of also our citizen input. We did receive 4 more citizen input emails supporting maintaining Worrell Wayside Park. So thank you.
Well, I'd like to say thank you very much for getting engaged. Mentioning, multiple hundreds of people getting involved with this. We did make a policy choice to redevelop it and add parking spaces. And man, this whole thing has got a life of its own now. We are going to add some courthouse space. We're going to have juries with a lot of people showing up in this downtown campus, so the parking is very serious. We probably have other options, and now that there's so much engagement and so much excitement about this, and we've learned a lot about the geological history since we even made this policy choice, and it was really just an architectural choice about what if, how could we do this? So now I've got hundreds of people watching our decision on this, and I don't mind that at all. Thank you very much for getting engaged.
Yeah, I'd like to provide some more details on what is going on with Worrell Park. Many people are reacting to some original, really rough conceptual drawings that were done for what a new Worrell Park would look like. In reaction, in response to to that concern that we've heard from people, we are undertaking a downtown parking analysis where we will look at all of the employee parking that we have. We will look at all of the fleet parking we have. We will determine whether there are opportunities to reduce the number of existing spaces that employees are using for fleet or personal parking. And every single one of those spaces that we can conserve from that pool would be one less space that we need to provide for to make the expanded courthouse function. And the courthouse is a really complicated parking issue because we ask people to come from all over Deschutes County to serve jury duty. And they do that pretty much on a voluntary basis. And making that more difficult for them is something that would probably discourage people from serving jury duty, which is a resource we desperately need. Many people have said, can't you just serve your additional parking need with, more public transit or more bike lanes? If everyone who was coming to the courthouse to serve jury duty was from the city of Bend, we could do that, but we can't. So after this parking analysis is done, we may need additional parking to be constructed. In which case, Worrell Park was Worrell Park reconfiguration was the least expensive of three options that at least three alternatives that we looked at. There was a fourth alternative to potentially purchase a piece of land across Wall Street from us, but that our offer wasn't accepted on that property, so that option's off the table. And this would not be, contrary to some of the message that's out there, Worrell Park would not be eliminated. We would maintain a Worrell Park. And my proposal is that we actually, going from that original concept, that rough concept that was put out, that we do something a little different, which would be to concentrate a removal of material on the stuff that was piled on top of the lava outcrop when they built the parkway. And when you remove that's a substantial amount of material. When you remove that, there is a natural lava outcrop underneath there. And I would like to see us preserve as much of that as possible. But the redesigned park would not be, the total park space would not be very much smaller than the existing. And I would, as I said, like to see us preserve natural topography as much as possible, and revegetate that with native high desert vegetation. So in terms of the net loss of native vegetation, it would be very small. Tenth of an acre, something like that. And I would hope that this pocket park, really is what it is, would continue to provide a place where people could enjoy, natural high desert vegetation, climb up to the top of something, and look around, and find maybe a little bit of space. But on the south end of this park, we would create more of a city park. This is where a lot of the piled material is. It would be flatter on this end. There would be ADA accessible pathways through it. There would be a plaza where people could gather. This park is not great for gathering at this point. So we would have a sort of a little bit of nature park, a little bit of city park, and this option would cost $2.5 million or less compared to an $8.5 million parking structure a couple blocks that way, or a $25 million multi-story parking structure on the back of this building. The last thing I'd like to say about this is that on that question of whether we should be building a multi-story parking structure, that will cost a lot more, $6 to $12 million more than the proposed Worrell Park reconfiguration. I think that's a question that should be asked directly to the voters. I don't think that I think that is a decision that's above our pay grade up here. And the way that we could pose that question directly to the voters would be through a general obligation bond measure. I'm not, since I don't think that the proposed park, the park I'm proposing, is so terrible. I'm not going to be the one who introduces a bond measure like this, but if Commissioner Dare is very supportive of us spending more money to build a multi-story parking structure, I would be happy to add a second vote if she wanted to lead such an effort. To people who are really in favor of the multi-story parking structure, that's my suggestion, is that you rather than keep telling us that we need to spend more money on it, you take it directly to the voters and taxpayers, make your case, and I think if people are persuaded, then they will support it.
Thank you, and as you are aware, that I am the lone vote that wants to save Worrell Park as we see it today. I'm a country girl, and I know once it's touched, it will never be the same. I really think it's important, and I so appreciate the community actually coming out all along. To me, building a parking structure with condos on the top is something that needs to be looked at. Do we not need workforce housing in Bend, in Deschutes County? So those condos could probably help, help finance the building. But, that's another issue. I think we're going to have to figure out where we are with our parking needs at this moment in time. So I do want to thank everyone. I want to thank the community. The park's been there for 25 years, and I'm really hoping that we're going to see the park as it is another 25. I want to change the message at this moment, and I actually want to acknowledge Ernie Brown, Lieutenant Brown, who passed away on September 4th. He served Deschutes County for 24 years. He actually they had his funeral on his birthday, which is never the way you want to end your life for your family. And I just want to acknowledge his service to Deschutes County at this time. So, yes. He'd been with us for 24 years. He was getting ready to retire. I thank his family for his service. So, anything else you want to add, Commissioner Devlin?
Well, I want to thank Ernie Brown, and it's a real sad situation. Let's acknowledge that. Back to Worrell Park real quick, though. So we're setting up for the next policy discussion. So thank you very much for the engagement, but we're going to be bringing that back to a board meeting just like this. What are the options? We're going to lay them all out and have this discussion. So, please pay attention next time that agenda item comes around with more analysis. That'll be the moment that choices will be made. So thank you very much for your engagement today.
My best understanding is that the parking analysis will be complete sometime around the end of October. So that's when a good time to, if not before, to come back and track this issue some more.
I'm sure there'll be distribution of information on this topic when it comes around.
Okay, consent agenda? Oh, do we have anybody on Zoom, Whitney? No raised hands? Okay, thank you. All right, consent agenda?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Just item number 1, dedication of deed. I had a call from the developer, really looking forward to having this process, so I can see it's here today. It's just aligning a little bit of right-of-way on the existing parcels, and I think there was a consolidation of parcels also. So in support of the development effort, I'm glad to see this on the agenda.
Okay, Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay, item number 1.
Morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Janice Garceau, Director of Behavioral Health here. I am here this morning to request approval and chair signature on document number 2022-784, which is grant agreement number 177672 with the Oregon Health Authority. That particular grant agreement brings $3,901,470 and some odd cents in funding to Deschutes County Health Services to increase behavioral health housing. This was part of a formula grant to county community mental health programs to address some of the critical housing shortages for people with mental health conditions. Deschutes County Behavioral Health, along with 27 diverse regional entities participated in a 2021 behavioral health housing and residential planning grant for the Central Oregon region. And the projects that we're proposing for funding with these dollars really are a direct reflection of that planning process. This is part of the Oregon legislature's award of $100 million across the state to address the housing crisis. And there are additional housing dollars available that we hope to leverage by using these grant funds as match dollars to grant applications to stand up residential treatment facilities. The roughly outlined, the proposed budget for these dollars is fairly straightforward. We intend to award in a grant process $3 million in funding as matching funds to a project that is being led by Best Care in collaboration with Deschutes County and Telecare to stand up a 16-bed secure residential treatment facility in the northern part of Deschutes County that would serve both Bend residents and Crook and Jefferson residents. The remaining funds we are holding in abeyance and hoping to be able to apply to opportunities for treatment housing or residential supports for children. That's roughly $850,000. We are finding that to be challenging as so far the Oregon legislature has awarded about $36 million in grant funds out for RFP for child residential treatment facilities. And that's probably not enough to address the needs statewide. So we're really still examining options there. And finally, we will take a little over 1% just to cover some internal administrative costs that amounts to $51,000. So that is what we're here for today, to accept the actual contract that awards the funds and request board approval and signature.
Okay, Janice, I have talked about this more than anyone for several years. We have a serious, serious problem in our state. I tried to at least temporarily get something happening in Deer Ridge, which was empty, half empty. And I look at this, and we're talking about $14 million for one 16-bed facility. Now, I know for a fact they had just built a 16-bed facility in Hermiston, in Umatilla County. They just paid $5 million for those 16 beds. It's a lovely, lovely facility. That cost is $312,500 a bed. We're talking about doing a facility here for $14 million, which is almost $900,000 a bed. I don't get it. We should be building two facilities, maybe one in Redmond, one in Bend, or one in Madras. We need more help, especially with what you're seeing on aid and assist. This is $14 million, 3 times more per bed than they just paid the Community Counseling Solutions, led by Kimberly Lindsay, just paid it $5 million. I believe that Lifeways had built it for about $4.5 million. But it was a lovely facility with issues there. So why are we not building two 16-bed facilities? I don't get it. Why are the square footage was missing on the documentation from OHA. There's no square footage there. I have no idea how many square feet they want to build, but they want to use $14 million. I'm thinking they should be able to build two 16-bed facilities. We have the need, we have the population. To quote someone in our judicial system, the bodies are piling up. People need help. So here it is, something that I've been begging for. Knowing, I grew up near Pendleton, near the state hospital, and what I've heard from Gina Nichols is Pendleton's state hospital was the best run hospital in the state of Oregon. It was run on a bit of a different model, incredibly compassionate. Gina had worked in that healthcare field in the 90s, and it was wonderful to hear that the community where I grew up actually was doing the right thing, and it's really unfortunate that the state closed it in 2014. At one point in time, it had 550 people. They were down to 50 people when they closed it. And where are those 50 people today? Yes, I know we need something, but honestly, we need 2 facilities for 14 million, not just 16 beds.
So, Commissioner, is there a question that you're specifically asking me? We didn't put together the budget for this project.
But we're sending $3 million there, and we should be getting 2 facilities out of 14 million, and 2 nice facilities out of 14 million, and not just one. Is this just another example? I mean, I begged for 130,000 for the Alfalfa Water District, 130,000 for the water district, and here we are. We have 14 million for one facility at $875,000 a bed. It just doesn't make sense. Somebody is not reading the numbers, and especially when I see a document that doesn't have square footage on it, it makes me really want to even find out more.
So I appreciate the questions about cost. I think I am not an expert on building costs. So what I can say is I did a little bit of research on the facility in Hermiston. It was built, ground was broken in 2016, and it was built over the period of time between 2016 and 2020. And I believe that both building costs have, what I hear from my colleagues in those fields is building costs have tripled since then.
No, they haven't tripled.
Hermiston is a community that is quite different from Bend and Redmond in terms of the cost of property and construction.
It's not that much difference, Janice. It's really not.
You just look at the capital construction cost estimates for our own courthouse expansion project. They have doubled since our earlier estimates. So
No, they went up 48%, and that was in 8 months. And I actually called them on that because the Facilities Review Committee had not really gotten together on that. That really bothered me. In fact, Chair Jerry Milstad is doing the Crook County Jail. I called him on that increase of 48%. I go, Jerry, what is going on here? And he goes, Patty, that needs to be looked at a lot closer. You're not spending your money, so you're not really paying attention. I built a couple houses. I know you have to watch your costs. We see commodities dropping now, but then, of course, how big is the recession going to be? And when the recession happens last time, remember, there were projects that were done for a lot less funding that were originally expected to cost. A lot of schools had a lot of different money that didn't get spent because of the recession, the last recession we were in.
Well, Janice is not the person to grill about why the project costs so much. We can ask her. We could make a request for Janice to go back to the leads on this project and collect some information on why and this is a unique kind of facility. I don't understand everything about what is what kind of unique features and measures you need to put into a secure residential treatment facility. But we could ask Janice to go and collect some information about to address your question about why this is so expensive and bring it back to us. But
no, I really think that's important, Janice. This money should be going way further. 14 million for 16 beds should be going way further. I was just at the public health building in Jefferson County. The cost per Sanska was $430 a square foot there. It's tall ceilings, et cetera, in that public health building. So yeah, we need to look at this. I want to get more for my money. I don't want to get less. And the fact that the square footage isn't even on the underlying document, I find that frightening. And I'm the one who wants the 16-bed facility, and I'm the one who wants Deer Ridge to open up tomorrow and not, how long will this project take? How long will it take? Will it be 3 years or 4 years before this is built? And we've got schizophrenic people on the streets that really need way more help than we are providing.
So we are considering an agreement between the county and OHA to receive funds. I don't believe that this document is the agreement that will be developed between the county and Best Care for transfer of those funds to them. Is that correct, Janice? Will there be some additional agreement to
It says
to
right
do
in
that?
our document that 3 million will be granted, of funding will be granted to Best Care if I sign this.
That's right. That's right. But this is not the agreement to transfer the money to Best Care. So I don't really see a reason not to at least initiate the transfer of funds that we know will be needed for the construction of some facility between the state and the county. And then when we move that next step of transferring the funds to Best Care, we can ask a lot more questions. We could conceivably even ask a lot of questions directly to them.
So can I just add a couple of pieces of information? This particular motion is for approval simply to accept the resources. However, we submitted our application to the OHA identifying how we would spend the dollars. So it does include at least our plan to expend the dollars as we outlined. I also want to add that the director of the Community Mental Health Program in Deschutes and Crook brought his proposal and the detailed budget to his commissioners, I believe, for approval as part of the process. I will double check that. And I have a copy of the detailed budget for the project, which I've gotten for permission from him to share if commissioners would like to take a look at the project budget.
Are you talking
So if
about
that's-
attachment number B? Attachment B?
No,
Because that's what I was actually given that yesterday by Dan Emerson, because I was asking for more details. And it doesn't have the square footage on it.
Attachment B.
Does it say that, attachment B on the top?
Can you reference in the meeting materials what page you're looking at?
No, this is something that Dan just gave me, because I was asking for, wow, if we're sending 3 million, what are we getting for our 3 million? And then I saw where Jefferson County was giving 1.4, Crook County is giving 1.4 million, and the total source of funds is over $14 million.
Which includes purchase of the property in addition to the building project. So I don't know what attachment you're looking at, Commissioner. I have attachment D, which is what we submitted. D as in dog.
Okay,
Is page 22 of 40 in the documents in the portal, the meeting portal. That's what I'm looking at. I have the grant application itself that Best Care has already submitted to the OHA for the project. And we are still waiting to hear whether or not the project has been funded. I can tell you that it was Telecare's team that put together the building cost detail, because they have built several of these facilities and built one, I believe, last year in the Portland area. So they have some direct experience of the cost of these projects. And I'm happy to share all of that detail. Again, the budget is put together by people with considerably more expertise than I have. And we simply review those numbers with them and submit the grant application, and hope that OHA is also doing its due diligence around that.
well, we could hope, but when you don't even have square footage on this document that I'm looking at, it makes it really hard to do your due diligence. So I think, I want the most for our citizens, but I really think for 14 million, we need 2 facilities. We need some square footage numbers.
So on this Exhibit D, which is page 35 of our packet, it is 22 of 40, like Janice mentioned. It says repurpose or build new secure residential treatment facilities, residential treatment homes, adult foster homes, supported housing units, and supportive housing units again. But supported and supportive housing units, I don't know if there's a difference there. So yeah, that's an interesting mix. It's just, the project or services line here. So it sounds like it's more than just that secure residential treatment facility, the 16-bed unit. I'm very supportive of that 16-bed unit. That's something I've been advocating for also. In fact, we did receive some backup and a request for ARPA dollars in support of this project too. So if it is multiple, I don't know if it's purchasing other homes or contracting with other homes, there's a whole array of services that are mentioned here. I'd sure love to know more detail about that.
Yeah, and they're asking for $500,000 from ARPA dollars,
Yes.
and I don't see them showing up there.
So maybe
With respect-
with that ARPA request, we could ask Best Care to come in and do a kind of a more comprehensive presentation for us.
Might be a good idea.
Is this
So I just want to reflect that I brought this proposal previously before we submitted the application. So we planned to expend the dollars this way. We've been operating under that assumption with the board's approval from the previous agenda item. And I definitely understand if there are questions about this budget. I'm looking at it now. I see what you're referring to, Commissioner, as attachment B in the grant application. I'm certainly willing to ask Telecare to be prepared to respond to this group when we enter into a further agreement to support the application further. So at this point, the application is with the OHA. It may be awarded. I think it has a good chance of being awarded, and just need direction about next steps at this point.
Well, I'm supportive of this step, and man, I want to learn a lot more about, the list of other facilities. So as I say, it talks about residential treatment homes, adult foster homes, and supportive and supported housing. So understanding what that whole array of services are. Sounds like there could be a lot there, when Commissioner Dare, you're mentioning 14 million, it's a lot for a 16-bed facility. Hopefully, it's a lot more than that.
Well, how would we know?
I don't either. I don't know. Yeah.
How would we know?
But it looks like it says it,
And
yeah.
the other piece that I think we really need to learn about is what unique features and infrastructure go into a facility like this. This is not a house. This is a secure residential treatment facility. This is a place where, this is a step away from the state hospital. This is a step away from a prison. And there will certainly be unique needs in a capital construction project and a facility like this that I do not understand very well, but I'm also not willing to say aren't necessary expenditures to have a successful facility. I mean, to follow this line of thought a little farther, if we just said, hey, why don't you just build a big house and run that as a secure residential treatment facility, we would run the risk of people who have some serious mental health challenges, who might be aggressive and agitated, being out in a neighborhood, out of the facility. So, I mean, this has to be a secure facility. And I don't, again, I'm not going to, I'm not the expert to second guess what needs to go into a facility like that. I think we should give the people who do have expertise in this an opportunity to fully unpack that for us. But I am quite comfortable proceeding with this agreement right now.
I just want to acknowledge that the dollars that were made available in the infrastructure grant represented by this agreement with the Oregon Health Authority were available to us to fund a whole list of possible projects. So commissioners, you're correct in noting that. The reason a secure residential treatment facility was selected as a primary project was because when we received a $50,000 planning grant that was regional and we did this extensive planning process, it was the number one need that was highlighted in the region. So there really was a method behind picking this particular resource for funding. We brought
Janice,
that.
I don't have any argument with that at all. I'm just saying we need 16 beds is a drop in the bucket. We can fill that so fast, and especially with the new aid and assist issues in the state that are happening. 14 million, I'm thinking 2 facilities is what we really need. So if no one really
How about-
understood the cost here, I think we need to do more and not less with 14 million.
How about we have a little joint meeting with our other counties and really get a feel for what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
So we've got 3 counties, we've got a huge need, we're all advocates of these efforts. And I understand, when you say $14 million, what are we getting for that? We don't know here at the table today. So let's shed a lot of light on this, because, I mean, it is
I
serious.
did get a hold of Commissioner Semilik and Judge Crawford, and, Commissioner Semilik wasn't aware of what was going on either. So, I mean, there's a lot of details, and I feel like, oh my gosh, do we not need it? Of course we need it. Do we not need 2 facilities? Of course we do. If they built 1 facility in Umatilla County, and they're going to use part of those rooms, according to Commissioner Schaefer this morning I talked to, for aid and assist, we need 2 facilities.
Well, we do have a Deschutes Recovery Center here at our public safety campus, which is a facility like this, which Deschutes County built, and I remember years ago talking about it, and it's a service to all of Eastern Oregon. So we are underbuilt all over the place.
Under.
Yep. So, I mean, this is a good moment to be able to, survey, the need, the possibilities, and advocate, especially, as the next legislative session comes around.
I know. Oregon is at the bottom of the list. We're 50th for residential treatment beds, 50th. We need more, not less. So, and definitely the fact that the one in Hermiston they just paid, $5 million for that facility in today's dollars, $5 million, and we're talking about spending 3 times more, and we're only getting 16 beds. We need at least 32. We probably need 64.
Well, we may be getting a spectrum of services, though, is what I'm deducing, but we don't know. We don't have that
know.
information.
We don't know.
So I'm supportive of this also, and the energy and questions that came up today. Let's follow up.
Yeah, no, I think a more in-depth session to unpack the costs and the justification of those costs would be great.
Thank you so much. I think that's it's nothing I want to hold up, but it's definitely, I want to get our money's worth, and it's such a critical issue for our world today.
Yeah, and I guess I would also just say procedurally, if we were aware that there were these kinds of concerns before, well, if there was time to call, Judge Crawford and Commissioner Similink, then, if we had given staff the heads up that we had these kinds of questions, they could have had more of the information at their fingertips for us for this session. And so I just encourage us to look ahead in the future and flag things that we want to know more about in advance of the meeting rather than identifying it during the Board of Commissioners meeting.
Well, this is policy happening real time here.
Yes.
So with this, I'll move approval and chair signature of this document number 2022-784, this grant agreement 177672 with the Oregon Health Authority.
Second.
Further discussion?
I'm really looking forward to engaging in this. This is where the rubber's going to hit the road, obviously, when money's really flowing. There's other big asks out there. We want to help the state of Oregon invest these dollars for the people that are in need.
Yeah, we got off on a very specific track there, but I just as a general comment, I want to say that I am really glad that the state has prioritized these investments in facilities that are critically needed in our community, and I look forward to whatever the secure residential treatment facility looks like to that landing here in our community.
Okay. And as chair, I will say, I really want 2 facilities out of the 14 million. And if I don't stop now and say that, it'll just be ignored and 14 million will happen and they're asking for another $500,000 in our ARPA funds. No, somebody's got to stand up and we've got to get our money's worth. We need more facilities. So anyway, the vote, Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Channing?
Yes.
And the chair votes no.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Can I just procedurally ask, since we just moved approval of chair signature, for this document, does that mean that the chair will not be signing the document?
I mean, we,
I'm asking the chair.
I'll talk to legal.
I'm sure we can work that out if it passed by a majority.
Right.
Because I'm happy to, I mean, you know, if it was full board signature, I'd be happy to sign, but if there's only one signature slot, we want to make sure that it actually gets signed.
My vote was a message to the public that I'm not going to waste 14 million. I'm going to do my very best to get 2 facilities in Central Oregon, because do we need 2 facilities? Clearly, we need 2 facilities. I have been talking about this issue forever, and I really, we need to get 2 facilities, but we don't need to waste public money. So, thank you. Item number 6.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, we're getting a plow. Is Randy available?
Let's go spend some money. Welcome, please proceed.
Yeah, where's Randy?
Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to our world.
Randy
Yes.
Tully.
Can you help me with those 2 facilities?
Maybe.
Okay. Well, you can take one of the cats
Groundwork.
out and do some groundwork for me. Thank you.
Yeah. So asking for consideration of the purchase of a Caterpillar 160 motor grader. This will be replacing a grader that is actually just about to have its 30th birthday. So it has reached the end of its useful life, and in the needs that we have for it, it's a very high need situation with our general road maintenance, and then in the winter, snow removal is key. So the replacement grader will have auxiliary plows on it, wing plow and a folding V front plow. It'll be highly capable for winter operations.
I see we have another cat tax on this one. Another almost $2,900 for the cat tax. Okay, how nice. But it did come in under budget.
Yes.
So that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and on the sales agreement, you'll see the list price of that machine was $779,440.33. We had a 37% discount through the cooperative purchasing agreement, which brought that down to $506,165.05. So that was a pretty considerable discount on that off of list.
So one question, is this ordering this item, or as I say, what's the lead time look like?
It's actually available.
Okay, good, yeah, so, and it's in our budget for this year also.
Yes.
So this is just executing a transaction that we knew we were going to be doing through this annual budget process.
Yes.
Okay, any further discussion?
Probably in 30 years, there's quite a few upgrades and control updates or whatever that would be able to be used.
We could talk for an hour
Yep.
about those features.
Just the technology and how it's controlled. Great.
But isn't that amazing, though, that a piece of equipment lasted for 30 years? I mean, when you think about it, refrigerators used to last for 30 years, and now they have planned obsolescence. So, yeah, kudos to Caterpillar for building a really long-serving product. Is there a motion?
I move to approve purchase of a motor grader with auxiliary plows from Peterson Cat in the amount of $506,165, $506,165.05.
And I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
I was explaining to somebody recently how we have our invoices with a line item called Oregon Corporate Activity Tax, and the response was, I'm an Oregonian, I don't pay sales tax. And it was just an interesting moment. It's like, oh, people don't even understand that is what's happening. It's propagating through our economy. When items are purchased, there is a tax associated with retail sales, especially on this big ticket item where they can put it on a line item by themselves. So that was just an interesting moment to hear somebody respond like that.
And they actually get passed on with each,
Mhm.
so you're paying more. Okay, Commissioner Chang, the vote?
Yes.
Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 7, we have the 17th Street Partners.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Christy Bollinger, Deschutes County Property Management. We're pleased to be here this morning to provide your board a high-level overview of the 17th Street Partner Collaborative Group. It's consists of members of, in public agencies, including the city and the county, and also private companies and nonprofits. So I'm going to hand it over to Bob Bohack, and then he's going to introduce the rest of the group, and we also have a handout that I will provide.
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you for coming, Bob.
Thank you for inviting us. Am I, you hear me? Okay,
I think it's working.
it is working, good. Along with me this morning are other individuals who have been active in bringing this group together and conducting the cleanups and cool-down shelters, et cetera. Linda Klein is from the city of Redmond. She is affordable housing analyst. Colleen Thomas, you probably already know, she's from County Behavioral Health. And on Zoom, Stephanie Hunter from Redmond Collective Action. And today I'm here primarily as a representative from Jericho Road. There are several activities. The main one that we'll be focusing on today are the cleanups that are done along the 17th Street corridor, which is kind of the interface between property that is not being occupied and the business and industries that are active on the east side of Redmond. But we'll also talk about the cooling shelters that were done there. And we also have and are continuing to try to work on abandoned camps, some of the cleanup that is off-road, and more specifically on county property, some on BLM, but primarily county property. I'd like Stephanie, if you would, please first introduce us to what Collective Action has done and some of the cleanup activities that have happened and the one that will be occurring.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. Redmond Collective Action, we're just a group of folks in the community that we have been doing a street kitchen for, we're going into our second year. We were on 17th and Greenwood, and we've moved over to East Antler, and part of that has been being a part of the 17th Street Partners group. And so how we coordinate with the cleanups is we help provide gloves and tools. We do outreach to get folks to show up and make sure they have enough information about how to show up for the cleanup and what they need to know. And then how that intersects with the street kitchen is we make sure that the folks that come out for a meal, they know when the cleanups are, they know when the dumpsters are going to be there. We put flyers out, we put garbage bags in with every meal, and we also fundraise or seek donations for to be able to provide gas cards and reimburse dump fees for folks that help us out when we do the cleanups as well. And we have quite a few folks that come out and help us out who are living out on 17th or in the surrounding area.
Thanks, Stephanie. Besides the activities that occur right on 17th Street, kind of on a quarterly basis, the cleanup activities, use of dumpsters, et cetera, during the summer, when we have had these last 2 summers, and we expect to continue heat events, we have cooling centers. The primary cooling center is run by Shepherd's House at what used to be Grace Gate. Jericho Road Shower Trailer shows up for that. We have a lot of donations from people in the community. But we also have a cooling center out on 17th Street where most of the folks who are out in the dirt use it extensively. The activity that
Bob,
is...
how many people do you think on an average day use the cooling center?
At Shepherd's House Shelter, their numbers were between 20 and 30 a day. And this last summer, I believe it was open 5 days. It was at least 4, but 5 days is when we had temperatures over 100. At the same time, I'm not sure of the numbers. I would estimate those at slightly less than that, but probably a dozen to 18 individuals would use the basically a misting station, but also water and other sundries were available underneath a canopy. So some shade, some misting water out on 17th Street during the heat events are available. The third activity, the one that is probably least visible, but I think just as important, we have individuals in the camps that we work with, because it's not only those of us who live in town and see some of the situations around camps. Sherry, Tony, Nick, Larry, and probably other individuals are active themselves in cleaning up abandoned camps. And about twice or 3 times a year, when we are doing these cleanups, when the weather is decent enough so we can get out there, we do partner with particularly Mike Satcher from Sisters, because he has the gear to bring over for cleanup around the camps that can then be simply taken to the dump. There is one coming up, and I would invite all of you who would be interested in coming this Sunday, probably about 12:15. The canopy, kind of like the scene that you're seeing here, will be available on 17th Street. We are having more individuals moving out into that area, but not along 17th. So there will be cleanup along 11th, off of Antler, as well as 17th and Greenwood, between Greenwood and Kingwood. And then there will be 1 or possibly 2 abandoned camps that we've identified with the help of individuals who live in the camps that will kind of be going off-road to clean up at that time. It's my belief personally that the county should not be entirely responsible for funding and doing the cleanup in the camps, and we are trying to encourage a collaborative effort with those in the camps who wish to have a cleaner and safer environment out there to help them keep the place cleaned up. And if you have any questions, those of us who are here be happy to discuss them or answer them if we can.
I was just going to ask Eric, how much did the county spend last time we cleaned up out in that area? Wasn't it a couple years ago? Do you remember? Okay, it was considerable.
It was considerable.
And
in my conversations, Christy, correct me if I'm wrong, it was right off of 17th Street, and it was on the order of about $7,000. We think we can substantially reduce that cost and get some of the camps cleaned up.
So that's this Sunday,
This Sunday,
starting at 12:15.
at 12:15, the canopy will be up right in the neighborhood of 17th and Greenwood. And then different groups will either be along 17th Street, or some of us who are used to being out in the camps and have worked with the individuals who have identified them will be then heading off eastward. The abandoned camps are most likely on county property, whereas along Greenwood, most of that, not all of it, but most of that is, of course, city property.
Okay, I remember going out with Officer Zook to see the entire out on county property, and apparently someone who was like the drug dealer was surrounded by more trailers, and I've heard that person passed on. So I'm wondering, has that one been cleaned up? Have you been out there, Bob? Do you know?
That's on the south end. I haven't been to that particular camp in several months. That's going to be a very difficult area that's going to take some time to get at. But there is one camp in that area where we've received permission, or I should say Tony has received permission to help them clean up their camp. And then there's an abandoned camp up north that used to have about 3 trailers on it. The trailers are gone, but a lot of the trash is around, and that will be our primary effort on the north end.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I was just trying to remember when I was last out at a cleanup.
You were at the one that we're going to be cleaning up.
It was almost a year ago. So
Yeah.
time flies. But during that cleanup event, I was just so impressed by how many people turned out to volunteer, how much trash was collected and how much better the place looked after the cleanup was done. So, many thanks for organizing those events and organizing, coordinating all that effort and making that work happen. And not just thanks for the cleanups, but thanks for serving and supporting our neighbors in need who are living in that area.
Appreciate
right
it.
now.
And on behalf, because it's mostly others who are doing the organizing, I've had a history of working with people in the camp, so it's a little bit easier for me to identify where we can go. The first time we had a cleanup approximately 4 years ago, we collected about 100 cubic yards. We filled multiple dumpsters. Sign of progress, we're down to now probably 50 to 60 cubic yards, only a couple dumpsters instead of 4. I hope that number will continue to decrease.
Yeah, and I see in their notes here that there's, as sometimes happens, when there are encampments in areas, and there is some trash from those encampments, there's other people who feel like that's an appropriate place to take their household items and dump them rather than going to the landfill and paying their fee, which is really unfortunate.
Yes, it's an unfortunate fact of life. I would my estimate is that probably 40 to 60% of the trash that we pick up is not from the folks who are out there living homeless, but it's from people who go out there and dump for free.
Yeah. I was at a cleanup out China Hat Road this weekend, and there was a refrigerator right in the middle of nowhere, which we got rid of it, but I'm pretty sure that the people who are camping out there weren't the ones who were using the refrigerator. So
Not a full-size one, at least.
yeah, it was.
This time around, we have at least one, probably 2 hot water tanks to pick up as we're out cleaning up, and those certainly are not used in the camps.
Is it posted not to dump on that street? Are there signs?
There used to be. I haven't seen them recently. I think they're now missing.
So, big picture, we've got to figure out how to turn the corner on this. I think you just mentioned there's more and more people still, right? So it's growing. There's more people living in the east side of Redmond there. It's unacceptable to just keep watching this grow. We're working with Oasis Village. We're going to be a partner on that. We're talking about designing some other, camping something options, whatever that's going to be. And it's not a good situation, and we can't just keep watching this get bigger. We've got to stop it and advocate to make it smaller. I'm keeping very generic terms here because I know everything's touchy about this. Everything is touchy about this. But let's define turning the corner and figuring out where we're going to go with this. We do have our new joint office coordinator, and we got a lot of efforts here. It's not okay to watch the east side of Redmond be utilized like this. We have economic opportunities. We have jobs being created. It's a shame to see the area look the way it is. I know there's people in need. I know there's people that, need help and aren't asking for help. I know some people are asking for help. So I'm just pointing out that thank you very much for your efforts, and let's be a partner. And I will be out there on Sunday. But it's not okay. The big picture is it's not all right. So as I say, I'm not even going to go any farther here now because we know we have to work this together and figure out what turning the corner looks like.
Well, the good news.
While we have these people with us, who are intimately familiar with the population out there, have served them and worked with them. But the really valuable thing I think for us to do would be to ask them about for their insights on people who exit homelessness from that area, what the pathways look like. Because if we can learn about what the pathways out of homelessness look like, we can ensure that our community is doing what it can to provide those pathways to people. And ultimately, I certainly agree with Commissioner DeBone that this is an undesirable situation, and lecturing the community about it is may or may not be helpful. But genuinely learning what is helping people get out of homelessness, and then doing what's necessary to ensure those pathways are there, is what we as a county government, I believe, should be focusing on.
I agree.
So if you,
Several of us, have already had conversations with Cheyenne Turrington, and I really look forward to working with her more. She probably will be coming over the Friday after this to our Friday outreach, and we will continue those informal conversations. But we are in the process in Redmond, at least, of getting, I think, a critical mass of people who need to be involved, and those are, of course, are some type of temporary transitional housing, multiple varieties of that, low barrier, high barrier, all the way along the line. Service providers are absolutely essential, but the most expensive item is going to be down the road. We need quite a bit more permanent affordable housing at the levels that individuals who are in the camps will be able to afford, whether they are on SSI or retirement benefits, because several of them are disabled and they're on disability benefits. And it's right now, it's not just difficult, it's impossible to find a decent rental for someone who is trying to live on $1,500 a month. And some of them are living on less than that. So
And Skyline Village is out there too. That's another 40 acres, multiple housing opportunities being planned. So there's a future out there. But as I say, it's that catch-22 of welcoming the next person or not. I mean, as I say, I don't have the answer here, but let's not think it's okay to watch this keep growing.
No, it is certainly most definitely not. We need to intervene, so that we can help those who need the assistance and want it, and also those of us who don't enjoy looking at that, and individuals in the need, in the very medically and socially poor situations that they're in.
So Colleen, are there any comments that you would like to make today about what you've seen and what's been happening in Redmond? I know that the Bethlehem Inn motel conversion is in pretty good shape now, and I'm just wondering if there are any comments you could make for the record.
Yeah, so I think to Bob's point and to Commissioner Chang, pathways for the people that are experiencing houselessness in Redmond is really important. There's a story of a couple that I worked with intensively for 7 years, and it took 7 years for them to build trust and accept help. And luckily we had a permanent supportive housing program that they were able to transition into and have been successfully housed for a year. And through that was a lot of intensive case management and supportive services, but also affordable housing. And so I think that when we talk about solutions to homelessness or houselessness, we need to look at the long-term option or services that are needed to be able to meet people where they're at with solutions like permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, Bethlehem Inn, different options like that. And it takes really intensive services sometimes for these people that are really isolated, have distrust in the system, to really engage and move forward for whatever sustainability and independence that they see fit for them as individuals.
So do you have an idea how many people are now in East Antler out there? Do you have any kind of a mental count?
I was just talking about this morning, and East Antler, I would say anywhere from 250 to 300, although the people that are living in that area anecdotally will report closer to 500.
Okay, and we do have winter coming up, and I know actually that winter is 7 times more dangerous for humans to survive outside. And I know there's definitely more cold in La Pine than there is in Redmond, but so we've got to be ready for that.
Yeah, I think one of the great things, Redmond historically has been underserved with services, and now we have amazing mutual aid partners and Shepherd's House and Bethlehem Inn being in Redmond as well. So there are options for folks, but there is also the fear of leaving someone's belongings to go into shelter, which is something that we often hear as well. So that's where, my team with Deschutes County Behavioral Health is really working to provide and increase our resources to meet folks where they're at so that they can remain safely in the community through winter months if that is what they choose to do so.
It's not a personal anecdote, but just yesterday, I was out in the camps with two of the individuals from County Behavioral Health who are new employees this last year. An individual who 2 years ago was not willing to talk about leaving the camps is now. That individual will be transported this next week to take a look at some places of temporary and then more permanent shelter. And it's because of the staff that are new and are working in Redmond that we're able to make this available. We need more of it? Certainly we do, but we have more chances now to intervene in the lives of individuals. And when they wish to, and we will encourage them to get out of the camps when they wish to, we'll have a better availability. We still, of course, need quite a bit more shelter, but we have a better availability to get them out of there. And for that, thank you.
Thank you. I know I actually was helping someone last weekend in downtown Bend, and and I said, please, just take my card. She seemed to think she was going to be okay. But I said, if you need some more help, just let me know. And I go, we will get you more help. Buying breakfast was just a little thing, but a small gesture, but to actually help that person get where she needed. That it's always challenging, isn't it?
So I have an opportunity. I was planning on going to the AOC meetings in Salem on Monday the 10th. So maybe Sunday afternoon would be a good time for a road retreat tour for myself. So I know that that's been discussed. So I'm just letting you know that as a follow-on for today, maybe I'll get down to Jackson County. And I mean, I can do it. I can get to Jackson County in the afternoon on Sunday the 9th.
If you could send me those dates, I'll talk to James. We don't have any tours scheduled, but I would call someone down there and ask them.
I figured any time is going to be valuable.
Yes, would love to see you tour their facilities down there.
Truly amazing work happening in the Rogue Valley.
Great. Thank you. And
Well, thank you very much for your efforts. I mean, it is a partnership at this point in time. It's very frustrating for everybody, and there's a lot of effort going on, but thank you so much for what you're doing.
And thank you to Mountain View for really working on families. Apparently, we have a lot of families, and they're at the top of their priorities now, so I'm very appreciative. Okay, we are now to item number 8.
I'm just going to give you a little bit bigger copy of that matrix.
Oh, that would be good.
Fuzzy in the packet. There you are.
Brought my reading glasses just for
Yeah, I remember from last time. So
I know, we're bad.
No, it was very
Thank you.
fuzzy for me. There's an area map in there, and then there's kind of another sheet with the condition of approval from the hearings officer decision. There you are. Yep. Mr. Doyle, would you like a copy?
You have one, yeah.
Sure.
nice and big.
And I'll give one to Nick. I saw. All right, thanks for the quick moment just to get everything set up. So for the record, my name's Tarek Rawlings. I'm an associate planner with the Community Development Department. And today we have deliberations before you. It's a plan amendment and zone change for 19.12 acre property along North Highway 97. This is from, the zone would be from exclusive farm use to rural industrial. And the plan amendment would be from agricultural to rural industrial. So this is, there was a public hearing on September 7th. There was no written record period applied to that. Following that public hearing. And so deliberations were set for today, September 28th. They were, that was kind of the main last steps in this process. And so in response to that public hearing, we've highlighted 6 issue areas on this decision matrix for you. And we'll go kind of similar to past processes. We'll just kind of go through in order unless you'd like to hit any particular issue area first. Be happy to start wherever you'd like, but if there's no.
Item number 1 would be fine. Tom.
Sure, that sounds great.
That makes total sense. We We could flip them around.
Sure, and I've tried to,
For a day, but no.
absolutely, yeah, and I've tried to sort of structure them, so there's a bit more of the content-heavy ones earlier on, and it gets a little more easy as we go through, so. If you had any initial questions, I'd be happy to answer them, otherwise we can, I think, just dive right in.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Of course. Yeah, so I think on the first issue area here, this deals with case law from 1989, Schaefer versus Jackson County. This applies to the proposal's compliance with Goal 14 of the Oregon statewide planning goals, which deals with urbanization. The opposing comments are essentially saying that the Schaefer factors do need to be addressed from this case law in order for Goal 14 compliance to be demonstrated. And the opposition believes that it hasn't been demonstrated, so it should be denied without a Goal 14 exception, essentially. The hearings officer found that these Schaefer factors from case law do not apply because there is no specific use being assigned to this proposal yet from the potential allowable uses of that zone and plan amendment designation. So staff agrees with that hearings officer's recommendation, but there's more nuanced interpretation from the applicant that essentially is pointing to the concept that there is no ability for the Schaefer factors do not apply because the rural industrial zone only would permit rural uses and not urban uses. And so the question of does this cause urbanization that isn't compliant with Goal 14 is not necessary, is basically how a little more nuanced interpretation of that issue area is. So from staff's perspective, that would be our recommendation of the board could find, and this is similar to past case law, past deliberations of the board, that because the rural zoning that's being proposed does not inherently permit urban uses, that the Schaefer factors do not apply. So if that's one option for how the board could deliberate, it basically upholding the hearings officer's recommendation, but adding this nuanced interpretation about rural uses, urban uses potentially within rural zoning districts. If there was other discussion, disagreement with that hearings officer's recommendation, we could talk further about how to explore the Schaefer factors or how the Schaefer factors may apply to this proposal. But happy to hear any thoughts you have at the moment.
I'll share some thoughts, and then the legality of determining Schaefer factors is a little bit abstract for me, but rural industrial, rural service to agriculture, I think of it as equipment, sales or maintenance, a little bit larger industrial, and it'll boil down to, a septic system is going to be the only option opposed to a sewer system. And then, there's going to be a kind of a hard, maybe it's separate than this, but, the hard stop at how many PM trips or whatever, the trip count, so that may be a different topic. But my point is, I do envision a rural industrial application. It's a rural place where there's, equipment coming and going, and maybe maintenance on that equipment, maybe sales of that equipment. So that's just my mindset here, I guess, is a starting point.
Okay.
I'd like to ask for a little bit of a refresh on the SETI case and how and why that came back to us to apply the Schaefer test, and
Sure.
whether that is kind of the situation or the logic around that is comparable or not comparable in this case.
It's very comparable. I would say the applicant and the hearings officer both very directly cited that SETI case law from 2020, specifically on interpretation of essentially urbanization, of whether an industrial zoning designation is even capable of permitting urban uses on a rural property. And the result of that case law and the way that the board deliberated that particular issue was that no, rural designation does not permit urban, essentially.
But then it came back,
It was brought up by opposition again, I think, just as it was another argument point.
I guess we made that determination, but essentially, LUBA asked us to reevaluate that. Is that
On the remand, I believe is what you're, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything, Mr. Groves? I didn't-
Yeah. Good morning, Commissioners. Will Groves, your planning manager. So in the Assetti case, the kind of the initial materials that were presented took a belt and suspenders approach. The applicant had both argued that the rural industrial zone is inherently not an urban zone. The uses are inherently not urban, and no further analysis is required to determine Goal 14 compatibility. However, there had been a case, Schaefer, under which a methodology had been outlined as a possible way to determine if a use was urban or not. And so in a belt and suspenders approach, in that case, the board, the decision history carried forward both a Schaefer analysis that said, look, if Schaefer applies, and we're not sure it does, this application still meets it. In addition, it's not, we're also arguing that this is inherently a rural zone. And Luba remanded and said, look, to the extent you believe Schaefer applies, and we're not sure it does, your analysis was a little bit thin on the number of people who might be on site. You said a small number of people, we don't know what that is. And so in the Assetti case, that was carried forward. In the case before you today, the applicant is arguing as Tarek described, a position that, to simplify the matter, that Schaefer just simply isn't necessary. The belt's enough, the suspenders aren't needed. So that's the approach that's being advocated in this matrix.
And so in that Assetti remand, we did, because of the belt and suspenders approach, we did apply the Schaefer test and determined it was met, just based on the number of potential
Number of employees.
Yes.
Exactly, that one factor.
Yes, okay. And particularly the applicant in that case liked the belt and suspenders and was advocating that we keep both of them on effectively. That they had in the remand process argued that that we do meet Schaefer, and so why not keep the belt and suspenders on? Okay. Although they also were of the opinion that the rural industrial zone is inherently a rural zone and that no further analysis is needed. And that came, if you recall, that came in part because of the relationship between urban unincorporated communities and what's allowed in those, and that the rural industrial zone is designed to be specifically less impactful than that, and so it sits below effectively that ceiling at which you'd have to start thinking about the urbanness of the potential uses.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And I didn't know if there was any other thoughts from you, Chair Adair, or if there's any other discussion on this particular issue area we could.
It is fascinating that Schaefer, according to the hearings officer, Schaefer factors do not apply to the subject application. So, and you're agreeing with the hearings officer, and yet you're saying that it could in that first comment.
So you're welcome to essentially deliberate however you choose is a lot of the flexibility I've kind of put into the wording there. But yeah, so I agree with the hearings officer's overall recommendation in that analysis, but I think that to address some of maybe the context within this case law treatment, Assetti, sort of the last process of remand of Assetti, I think that nuanced interpretation from the applicant adds just that much more detail to essentially, if you were to deliberate that way, it would keep it in line with past board deliberations on
Okay, so you're
similar
saying
matters.
Belt and suspenders then?
Kind of for this.
That's a good analogy. Thank you for.
We use it a lot in planning, yeah.
Yes, I can visualize that. Okay.
Well, so I would support that the Schaefer factors do not apply. And so, with the experience of driving past, the Assetti property, the previous applicant, we've seen manufactured home storage temporarily. We've seen them come and go. We've seen large truck trailers, maybe lined up and then go. So it's a good cushion area for people just to spread out, do something, and then move their equipment along. So that's what I've seen there over the years. Plus equipment sales and maintenance, and that was built as a a hay squeeze facility originally, kind of a value added, referring to another property again. But those are the kinds of things we've seen now over there. I don't see those as urban per se. As I say, it's not heavy electrical load, it's not heavy sewer load, it's just a space for activity and generally associated with rural. So I don't see Schaefer as a test that needs to be documented or
Sure. And just to clarify
Apply.
my own understanding, it sounds like you're saying the Schaefer, and your thought is that the Schaefer factors do not apply because these uses are inherently rural and not urban. Is that correct? Or-
if that's the way the terminology needs to read.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
that was how-
it does fit for rural. Yes, I agree with that.
Sure.
It does sound like rural is what you're talking about. Yes.
Well, I think it would be lovely to have the belt and the suspenders, but if, if our rural industrial zone doesn't permit urban uses on rural lands, then, a belt or a suspenders is, I guess, okay.
Sure, and is there maybe a vote that we would like to?
So a consensus on item number 1, the Schaefer factors do not apply, and so the second part of that is, so has something been met by the applicant, or it doesn't apply?
Yeah, just that they don't apply, and then I guess if the next piece of detail would be how they don't apply. Is it because of the hearings officer's specific finding that there's not a specific use, or is it that and the fact that these
Okay.
are inherently rural?
Yeah,
uses?
so, and when I'm referring to what I've seen over time, that is a specific use which we haven't got to yet.
Okay, sure.
So I guess, yeah, for clarity, I agree that because no specific use has been proposed, and with the experience of what I've seen on a like parcel in the area over the last 15 years. So I don't know if we need to put that in there, but that's the words that I'm providing in the
Sure,
context.
in terms of the rural character, just to that last piece you're saying, sure.
Rural character. Okay.
And is there a second to that particular,
Motion?
Do we want to, well,
or it's not
Idea.
exactly maybe
It's an idea.
Yeah.
Do not apply, it's a pretty strong statement. I mean, I would say Schaefer factors are relevant to this question of urbanization, but should they be required or not? I'm okay saying that they shouldn't be required.
Okay, second? Okay, so.
if we're voting, I
Okay.
support
Okay, Commissioner DeBonne, yes?
factors do not apply
Commissioner
and
Tran?
hearings officer.
Yeah, I guess I still wouldn't use the words "do not apply," but I don't feel like we need to challenge the hearings officer on this. I mean, or disagree with the hearings officer on this.
Very good.
Okay. And the chair agrees with that vote.
Sure, okay, very good.
So basically, the outcome of that is accepting hearings officer
Right.
statement on that issue.
That's mostly what I heard, yeah.
Yes.
Very, very good.
Because no
Okay.
specific use has been proposed.
Sure. Okay, so the hearings officer's recommendation will kind of be upheld on issue area number 1. Thank you for clarifying that. And we'll move to issue area number 2. This deals, again, with Goal 14, urbanization of the Oregon statewide planning goals. This is more specifically to the question of whether Goal 14, or excuse me, whether the rural industrial zone or this proposal would result in specifically urban uses on rural properties. And the oppositional comments are saying that a Goal 14 exception is needed, essentially that this would create urban uses on a rural property, and because there's no Goal 14 exception sought or approved, that this should be denied. The hearings officer found, and this is more specific to what part of what we were just discussing, that this inherent use, these proposed designations do not permit urban uses on rural properties, and because of that, no Goal 14 exception is needed, and Goal 14 has been met by this proposal. So that would be the kind of similar to last issue area. Staff would agree with the hearings officer's recommendation on this particular item in just the same light of that this doesn't inherently permit urban uses on rural property. But happy to hear any discussion the board might have on this issue area.
This one's easier to agree with than the last one.
Sure. It was a bit of a combined series of findings in the hearings officer recommendation for the first issue area, so appreciate your patience with how these things have shaken out.
Yeah, your second comment is that the board agrees with the hearings officer's interpretation. They may behold the findings in the recommendation.
I support that also.
Absolutely.
Okay, so do we need an official vote?
I just didn't know if there, yeah, so I've heard, and Commissioner Chang, if you had any other additional thoughts, I'd be happy to note those, but sounds like there's the two on the upholding the hearings officer's interpretation on issue area number 2. All right, thank you very much. That was a quick one. The third issue area deals with Goal 5 compliance. This is for open space and sort of natural resource areas and different values and resources that can be categorized within Goal 5 underneath the, again, the Oregon statewide planning goals. Opposition is asserting that because this is along a scenic highway corridor, that there needs to be, that Goal 5 essentially has not been met, that this would be a conflicting proposal with that Goal 5 resource of a visual highway corridor. The hearings officer, amongst other findings, was saying that this highway corridor is not actually inventoried within Chapter 2 of the county's comprehensive plan. It's not considered one of the valuable sort of open space resources that are captured within Chapter 5 of the county's comprehensive plan. And then ultimately, and staff really agrees with this part of it, the landscape management combining zone that essentially indicates that scenic corridor is something that gets reviewed during site plan review, usually for current development, things like structural development, stuff that would need a building permit, for instance. So that's typically where the sensitivities and requirements of that scenic corridor are reviewed in detail, is typically during that process. And because of that, essentially the hearings officer is saying that no review of that landscape management combining zone is required in the scope of a plan amendment zone change proposal like this one. And so staff agrees with that hearings officer interpretation, and but open to any thoughts you have.
Can you detail out for us a little bit that process during site plan review where the landscape management combining zone evaluation is done?
Sure. Yeah, so it's triggered, that landscape management combining zone is typically triggered by something requiring a building permit, whether it's a structure or some other infrastructure feature or improvement. There can be, that building permit is one very clear way that that's triggered. If there's anything added on to other existing structures, that's also essentially, if it's a substantial alteration, so something that's more than 25% of either the size or the value of the existing development, that would also trigger this site plan review. And really what the site plan review is an analysis of how visible this proposed development might be from the scenic corridor. So in this case, the highway traveling, whether it's the traveling public or just really from any viewpoint on that highway corridor. The mitigation measures baked into that code section are essentially visual screening requirements. The county staff can require plantings or that the applicant basically maintain or otherwise preserve the vegetative screening or other visual screening features that might be like naturally on the property. So things like walls might not be actually helping when you're trying to block something in a natural sort of camouflaged way. Another more direct way is we require specific muted earth tone colors for any sort of exterior finish on those. And so it does become really more of a specific building site plan review, kind of a design feature review is essentially how those types of conflicting uses within the LM combining zone can be mitigated and be approved. So that's a long way of saying that it comes up when we do site plan review for building permits, but a lot of it's design focused.
So Tark, really only one lot is along 97?
Right, there's
And
there's
then-
only one right touching the
Right, there's only one
corridor,
touching.
exactly.
And so it's really a very small portion of the 19 acres.
Sure, so, excuse me, the landscape management combining zone is an overlay that extends several hundred feet on either side of the highway. And so it's not you're right that something right proximal to the highway is likely much more visible than something further back. But there's portions of all three. Two of them are entirely within the landscape management combining zone, and most of the larger third property is also within that same combining zone. But
Okay.
you're right, there's only the smallest of the three is the only one abutting the highway corridor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it possible that there would be, with rural industrial zoning, there would be uses allowed that could be pretty visually significant that don't actually require significant construction? We're putting 20-foot tall pieces of heavy machinery out here, and a whole lot of them. I mean, is it?
So in a different sense, just for how those might be mitigated outside of the LM requirements, is that more or less what you're asking?
Well, I mean, so, some of what I just heard was, well, when we get to site plan review, we have methods for evaluating, visual impacts to the landscape management combining zone. But if there's nothing that triggers a site plan review, I guess that's what I'm trying to understand. Is there things that could be done on rural industrial land that are visually pretty significant that don't end up triggering any kind of a site plan review?
So on rural industrial lands, and really most, and we don't have too many of them, but most commercial lands in the county, there's a process for any kind of expansion or alteration of a use that's also called a site plan review process, and that's much more subjective, I would say. There's definitely very objective thresholds and different requirements, but it's way more thorough than, I would say, the LM combining zone review. There are things that require landscaping, buffering distances, and different types of visual screenings and parking areas. Those might come up in the future for any type of a specific development that might be proposed within the industrial zone, but there isn't one proposed now. But for things like in Tumalo, those have to go, the cideries and things have to go through site plan review to make sure that their parking areas are separate and sometimes visually screened from maybe residential nearby zones. So there's usually a fairly robust site plan review process for any kind of new proposal or alteration of a proposal in industrial or commercial zones. That would be the other way I would note that could trigger that type of a review.
There could be a gravel lot with yellow forklifts and red tractors and semi-trailers, big white semi-trailers that would be visual.
Right, and exactly. I think in some of my past experiences reviewing proposals in Terrebonne and Tumalo and things like that, some of the requirements are that you have like tree plantings and different types of visual screening. So there might be some requirements. It would depend on the site itself and how they're exactly proposing to configure it, but there's definitely opportunities for that type of mitigation. And I saw Mr. Groves came up again, if you had any.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioners. So, of course, this particular deliberation point is about the effect of Goal 5 and the landscape management combining zone. And the hearings officer matched our understanding with this, that's a specific provision meant to deal with structures. And really it comes down to keep them earth tone, plant at least some trees out there. The goal isn't to make it invisible, but if someone came in with a hot pink building, we would have strong grounds to deny it. This was an effort to keep things natural and not garish along certain important highway corridors as people come into town. With regard to kind of your follow-on question, which really isn't at issue today, but it's a good one, it has to do with site plan review. So anytime you look to convert a site to some other use, and in particular here a commercial one or industrial, you're going through an 18-124-060 approval criteria review. And it specifies that areas, structures, and facilities for storage, machinery and equipment, services, mail refuse, utility wires, and the like, loading and parking, and similar accessory areas and structures shall be designed, located, buffered, or screened to minimize adverse impacts on the site and neighboring properties. So our interpretation of that section is that, if you were going to create a gravel lot and put a variety of colorful machines, yellow, red, et cetera, that those would need to be visually screened from the neighbors and highway. And so typically you see slatted cyclone fencing as the preferred solution to that. But we ran into an issue with there was a question in a previous case for a solar farm as you drive north on Redmond, on your
I
way
was
to
going to bring
Redmond.
that up, Will.
Yeah, you can see that's.
And who's
yep.
watering those trees? I don't think they've grown. I think they're shrinking. And,
They're getting small.
Red
Yeah.
ones, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
who's enforcing that?
In the end, and we've talked about our code enforcement process, is that we have no budget for black helicopters, and so we're not out there generally inspecting for those, and we wait for someone to complain. Where particularly where there doesn't seem to be an imminent health and safety threat. That's something we could follow up on. Certainly, keeping landscaping as alive is, particularly for unoccupied business sites, is something that they struggle with, and it's certainly within our code enforcement authority to revisit those. Those would be required as conditions of the approval that aren't, to the extent they're not thriving, aren't being adhered to.
Didn't they have a new owner for the solar farm? Didn't it go through some kind of issues? So.
I'm not aware of that, but it's possible.
Because I brought it up a couple years ago, and I don't think that the trees are growing still.
Yeah, I'll take a note to follow up on that.
But I think that was very helpful in Mr. Grove's positioning of just maybe a reminder of the scope of this is just within whether there should be additional findings under the Goal 5 compliance piece from the hearings officer's recommendation. Again, the hearings officer at that time just said that it's not inventoried as that type of a resource that would require that type of a Goal 5 analysis, and LM review is handled at the site plan review phase. So,
Well, and with the information about like a storage area, if there was a development action, it's that it would be some kind of mitigation fencing would be required. So, with that, I'm supportive of the hearings officer decision on this.
very good.
It makes the most sense.
Sure.
Yeah. Fencing and vegetation don't guarantee that a scenic view hasn't been spoiled, for lack of a better word. But I don't disagree with the hearings officer's opinion on this.
Very good.
So we have agreement?
Yes, yeah, I heard 3 in favor of upholding the hearings officer's recommendation, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah, thank you, Will. And I think in that point, we're just over halfway. We'll go to number 4 here, if there's no further questions on issue area 3. This has to do with transportation impacts and Goal 12 compliance, Goal 12 of the Oregon statewide planning goals. The question really is if with this condition of approval, which I have a printed copy here, it's just kind of a slide blown up here, but this is the condition of approval that was vetted by ODOT staff, by our own county senior transportation planner, and the applicant's own transportation professional on their team. That was all in agreement. There was opposition pointing to that even with this condition of approval, that Goal 12 is not met and a Goal 12 exception is needed. That was the oppositional position. The hearings officer found that with the imposition of this trip cap, that essentially that there is no adverse effect or significant effect on the identified function, capacity, and performance standards of the affected transportation facilities. And further, there was really no information challenging the applicant's traffic study or the condition of approval in that record. And so because of that, the hearings officer found that a Goal 12 exception is not needed and that Goal 12 was met by this application. So the board could deliberate upholding that hearings officer finding or make additional findings requirements under this. But just keep in mind that this is tied to this condition of approval that's before you.
So your second paragraph, that I agree with the hearings officer and the applicant's interpretation on this issue.
Including the trip cap
Right.
condition of approval. Excellent. Okay. So I've noted 1 in favor of that.
So can we get, 32 trips in the PM peak hour. So I'm thinking that's a high-speed north-south route. Somebody could take a left across traffic there, I think.
I think that the, and this is something I think is still pending, but the, within the application materials, there's an ODOT driveway application that I believe was just specific to a right-in, right-out.
Okay.
I don't know what state that application's in at this time.
So 32, so I guess my specific question, 32 trips, does that mean one person turning in and then one person turning out is 2 trips?
I think it was one person there and back is one.
So one person's.
Or excuse me, no, it'd be, yeah, it's there and out is 2, one person counts for 2, I believe, if it's.
Yeah, that was kind of my only thought, yeah. But I support the hearings officer conclusion on this, and knowing that, Deschutes County traffic planning, ODOT traffic planning, everybody knows that this is an application. They've been informed,
Correct, yeah. There was a lot of agency coordination on this Goal 12 issue.
And I support the condition of approval specifically.
Very good.
I think this is a fine condition, but I do not believe that it is, that there are any mechanisms for monitoring or compliance.
And I think you're speaking to some of the oppositional comment there, sure. That was essentially part of why they disagreed with the condition of approval.
Yeah. So I don't support the hearings officer's opinion on this issue.
Very good. And so just to be clear, we have two in favor of upholding the hearings officer's interpretation on this issue, including the trip cap condition of approval, and 1 not supportive of the hearings officer's issue.
I agree.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Just given the location of this property in relation to an already highly congested Highway 97, this is putting conditions in place that are basically exist only on paper. I don't think addresses the public concerns with traffic impacts adequately.
Okay, very good. And any other thoughts on that, this particular issue area, number 4, before we move on? All right, and hearing none, we'll move to issue area number 5. This is a familiar topic. This deals with the Goal 3 compliance. So that's agricultural related goal. And this is specifically related to the soil study that was provided by the applicant. And really the question before the board is, can these DLCD, and so this is a soil study that is approved essentially by the Department of Land Conservation and Development, the state land use authority. And so the question before the board is, can these DLCD certified soil studies be used to update these sort of higher level Order 3 NRCS soil designations? The opposition does not believe that these Order 1, more specific, site-specific Order 1 soil surveys are valid, that the higher level information should prevail. The hearings officer did not agree with that, specifically finding that these high-level designations are not binding and that you can use these as long as they're certified by DLCD, a person can use these Order 1 site-specific soil surveys to demonstrate soil capability, and especially in terms of agricultural designation. And so any thoughts you particularly have, you could uphold the hearings officer's decision on that one interpretation, finding that it is valid to use these Order 1 soil surveys, or we could make additional findings or related to the adequacy of the soil study or other findings related to agricultural designation and Goal 3 compliance. But happy to hear any thoughts you might have.
I don't have any concerns with the concept that you could replace kind of broad brush federal soil maps with more detailed site-specific evaluations, but I do have concerns about the way that the data generated from that survey is being used and what the applicant claims it says. In the first place, the idea that you would count the 1.3 acres of canal as in the assessment of the area that can or can't grow crops, to me is ridiculous, because it is a land that is occupied by infrastructure, so of course it's not going to grow crops. So, but it's when we look at when we look at that property, it's almost 10% of the total, the total 19 acres that we're talking about that's covered in a canal. So, saying like, oh well, this percentage of the property can't grow crops because of poor soil. It's not because it has poor soil; it's because it's covered in a canal. So I think that component of the way that this criteria is being addressed is really problematic. And I also have concerns about the way that an evaluation of the current soil depth and quality is being used to say that a site has no agricultural potential. When it wasn't very long ago when this property had water rights to the canal that runs right next to the property, there are definitely many parts of Deschutes County where the soil is pretty shallow, but that doesn't mean, especially when we're dealing with small properties where you could carve off small portions and basically add to soil depth, that couldn't be agricultural land that is incredibly productive for a variety of crops. So I'm not going to agree with the hearings officer's decision on opinion on this issue either.
Very good. And was there any other discussion from either of the other two commissioners?
I support the hearings officer decision. It was a choice by the property owner to put the water back in the river, and I think there's water rights still associated that could be or might be transferred. That's a different legal decision, but might be transferred to another location, and we all know water is real important here. So, I support the hearings officer decision.
Very good.
You do have a comment. I agree with Commissioner DeBone, but you do have a comment determining that LCDC's certified soil study, as the one provided, can be used to update. Do we need to make that decision at this moment then?
You probably don't have to use the exact wording of DLCD. I mean, the hearings officer, if you were to uphold that finding, did have inherently an interpretation that the DLCD certification was something that was required for these types of Order 1 soil surveys to be valid. And so in that sense, if you were to deliberate outside of just upholding the hearings officer recommendation, I might recommend that you use some of that specific language just to stay within a similar interpretation, just of the validity of those Order 1 soil surveys. But you're, of course, welcome to deliberate however you'd like.
Okay. It seems like our comment should include something.
I think that's probably the most thorough way to make a finding upholding
Right.
the hearings officer's recommendation. Which is included in Commissioner DeBone's
Right.
motion for
made
upholding
it differently
inherently.
than-
But I like that you're narrowing down on the details.
Okay, thank you. So it's what, another 2-1?
Sure, if you're in agreement with the hearings officer's recommendation, Chair Adair, is that correct?
Yes.
Very good.
So, is this precedence setting, determining that DLCD certified soil studies can be used to update soil designations? I mean, I'm just thinking through what.
So this one
Is this
came
new,
up-
unique territory?
This came up in a recent zone change. I forget the file number of which, but that Kyle Collins was the staff planner for, where there was a challenge of that Order 1 soil survey. This is virtually the same discussion and challenge, I would characterize it as.
Has the board been in this decision space before?
The board has. This has been the longstanding position of the board, is that these Order 1 soil surveys can refine the NRCS maps.
Okay.
Opposition has been pressing this point to LUBA repeatedly, and it's something that is a matter of state law ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see on appeal how that plays out specifically. The closer question, which is new here, is how is the canal counted versus other aspects in that Order 1 soil study, and I anticipate we'll get some response from LUBA on how that counts or doesn't in these types of analyses.
And either way we go on that, it's state law, basically, we're applying, correct? So
That's correct.
it needs, yeah.
So in terms of the question of precedent, we might have to answer this question over and over and over again on an application by application basis, and there's not really, I don't think there's any precedent associated with what we say on a instance by instance basis.
Yeah, with what you say in this application, but what you're seeing is an evolution of case law. Hopefully what comes out of this is LUBA says, hey, we heard the conundrum you were in, and we've told you how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Please take note. And so in the future, this would say, someone could simply say this matter was solved in this case.
Yep.
There may be ongoing nuance and exploration of that, but I expect from the case the board previously decided that Kyle Collins was working on, as well as this case, that we will see some specific language from LUBA helping us understand how these things work under state law. Now, I think it's really helpful that the board has in each situation developed a good case fact pattern under which LUBA can explore those issues.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it. All right, and then if there's no further discussion on the Goal 3 and soil survey issue area, we can move to the final issue area. And this one has been brought up in the past several times as well. This has to do with code enforcement or code compliance and Deschutes County's Title 22 related code. Essentially, the question before the board is can or do potential land use violations on this subject property, just is exactly what the scope of the question is. Do they prevent the county from approving applications for any kind of land use development? And so the hearings officer found that there is no violation that's actually been established under that Title 22. There's no complaint filed, there was no adjudication of a violation, so because of that, and there's no challenge of that there is no violation under which that Title 22 provision may apply. And staff agrees with that hearings officer's finding on that particular issue area.
So Tarek, your second paragraph then, the board agrees with the hearings officer on this issue that they may uphold the findings, is how I feel.
Very good.
I agree with that also.
Very
I would
good.
support that.
Sure. So 3 in support of the code compliance issue. Thank you so much, commissioners. I really appreciate your time. Those were the 6 full issue areas. In terms of next steps, we're going to have to, oh, hi, Dave, excuse me.
And here's Dave.
Here we go.
Commissioners, odd to be sitting on this end here. Dave Doyle, County Council. I would ask, in light of the fact that your decisions on the various questions that were asked in the matrix is not unanimous, that you consider a motion now to approve the zone change and plan amendment. There are file numbers there. Kyle could point those out to you, but it'd be good to have that motion now, and then the findings will be brought back to you at a later date.
So, and that does help because sometimes if somebody watching this it won't be clear if it was approved or denied or the intention of the board because of all the discussion we just had. So, understood. So I'll move approval of this plan amendment and zone change, upholding the hearings officer decision, basically at all points.
You're technically accepting the recommendation. The hearings officer didn't make a decision.
Accepting recommendation. Got it.
And I could point you to the file numbers too, if you'd like to include those in your.
247-21-000881-PA, and then it says 882-ZC.
Correct.
Agreed. That's the motion.
Okay. Is there a second then?
Not
Okay.
for me.
So I'll second the motion.
Very good. All right.
Further discussion? Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Chang?
I would like to further say a few more things. I can vote no first and then say things later, but no.
Go ahead.
No.
Okay. And the chair votes yes, and you can make your comments now?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, again, referencing recent history, I supported the SETI property rezone to rural industrial, and the arguments to me on that case were that it was located at a major transportation intersection, and it was surrounded by rural industrial uses on a couple of sides. We cannot say the same things for this proposal. I am concerned that a proposal like this eliminates viable agricultural land from our agricultural land supply in the area. I am concerned about the traffic impacts of the addition of a use like this. I'm concerned about the visual impacts, and I guess I'd also just like to say that I appreciate these decision matrices, but I to some extent I feel like what they are is established rabbit trails for us to go down to approve something, which, at the higher level violates the intent of the state land use planning system, which is very concerned about things like scenic impacts, preservation of farmland, et cetera. So that's just a little bit of background on why I am voting no on this proposal.
So a little bit of thought on that. So this specific parcel, the one closest to the road, has a historical commercial building. It was used for commercial purposes many years ago. And the second parcel back has a large industrial building, and has been a long history of sales and maintenance on servicing the area for forklifts specifically, but other tractors, supplies. So I think there's a long history on this property of this opportunity.
There's a long history of uses that are compliant with EFU zoning. Storage of farm equipment, if I understand correctly, is a use that is allowed within EFU zoning, as is growing hay and pasture grass, which was also practiced on this property in the past. So I respectfully disagree with your perspective on this.
Well, as I say, when it comes to the agricultural water and that land specifically, the zoned EFU land, this is a great opportunity to transfer water rights somewhere or anywhere too. So I think there's an upside to it.
Yes, I'm hoping that the water rights can be transferred to the North Unit. It's where we need the water.
Well, what we really need to do is do a whole lot of on-farm efficiency all over our community, and then there'll be tens of thousands of acre-feet of water to share with the river and with farmers with junior irrigation rights. Taking farmland offline to save another farm is a far worse way of accomplishing water supply reliability in my mind.
Well, I'm just happy that COID with their senior water rights is actually down now, I believe, to 27% flood irrigators of that whole irrigation district. So it's definitely more people are managing their water differently, but then again, you see the unintended consequences where irrigation systems, expensive equipment is being impacted by the mud flow that's going through the piping. And so, there's always issues to deal with. But thank you, Tart.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and just to clarify, it was 2 in favor of upholding the hearings officer's recommendations and
Yes.
We'll have to work with the applicant just to kind of get the draft decision, everything ready, but we'll come back as soon as possible for first reading of that ordinance. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for being at that meeting the other day.
Which one was
The
that?
City of Bend meeting about working with younger people.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Well, thanks again. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Okay, now we're at item number 9.
Can we take a quick break? Just
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. Yes, of course, we're just going to take a 2-minute break, please, Whitney. Thank you so much. That's a good idea. Thank you very much. Okay, we are now to item number 9. I see Haley King has provided us with a matrix for our decision. Thank you, Haley.
You're welcome, Chair Adair. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Hallie King, Associate Planner with Deschutes County Planning.
I always, my niece is Haley. I'm so sorry, Hallie.
worries.
I'll say it 3 times when
I always tell folks it rhymes with Sally.
There
Sally.
we go. Now you'll know.
Thank you very much. I needed that.
No worries at all. So I've got a quick PowerPoint presentation to share, and I'll have Whitney share the screen, and I'll cycle through the presentation. Again, we're here today to commence deliberations for the Eden Properties Plan Amendment and Zone Change. Files number 247-21-001043PA and 1044ZC. And I will quickly, just an overview of, again, of the property. I know you've seen the property before, but again, it's encompasses 710 acres owned by Eden Properties, consisting of 9 different tax lots, and the applicant's request is to change the comprehensive plan designation from agriculture to rural residential exception area, and a concurrent zone change from EFU to RR10, rural residential 10. A quick overview, again, of sort of how we arrived at this point and the overall process for these applications. So it's a quasi-judicial plan amendment zone change, which requires 2 hearings, with the board being the final local decision-making body. And so our initial hearing was with the hearings officer in April of this year. Then the hearings officer issued a recommendation of approval on June 2nd, 2022. The board then held a public hearing on the application on August 17th, and which brings us to today, September 28th, for deliberations. And following deliberations, there will be an anticipated decision and an ordinance to follow. After the initial hearing after the second hearing with the board on August 17th, the board left the record open for 21 days. And during this open record period, we received a number of submittals during both the new testimony period, the rebuttal, and then final legal argument. Notably, during the new testimony, we received the coordinated agency comment from DLCD, ODA, and ODF&W, essentially re-entering their original April 19th comment letter into the record. Again, we received comments from Central Oregon Land Watch, in addition to Red Side Restoration Project, in addition to general comments from property owners in the nearby area. The applicant also submitted testimony and evidence and rebuttal during this open record period with their final legal argument prior to the close of the record on September 7th. In deliberations process, I know the board's gone through this before. Obviously, with the prior item was essentially the same process, but staff has provided a decision matrix for you today, printed out copies. And so what we'll do is we'll kind of go through each of those issue areas. The board will have a chance to deliberate, ask any questions, and then we'll ask for a vote on each of those items. And a couple options moving forward. Obviously, if deliberations conclude today and a vote is rendered, staff will return with a draft decision and consideration of a first ordinance reading. Alternatively, the board can also decide to continue deliberations and therefore vote to a future date. And with that, again, I've got the project website up on the page, which is where the application record is in its entirety. And my email is also up on the screen if anyone has any questions. But unless the board sort of has questions about overall process, we can go ahead and kind of go through the decision matrix at this point.
Go ahead.
I'm ready to proceed.
Ready to proceed? Okay. And Whitney, we can end share screen. Thank you. Okay, so starting on page 1 here of our decision matrix, and what I'll do is I'll provide kind of a brief summary of the approval criteria, some of the applicant's testimony, the opposition's testimony, and then let the describe to the board sort of the action or the question that essentially needs to be answered with each of these issues. So the first issue area revolves around the state's definition of agricultural land. And this criteria is important because the review of this plan amendment zone change really revolves around the applicant's assertion that the property does not qualify as agricultural land per the different steps or the tests in the state's definition. And so the applicant, like I said, they've chosen the pathway to demonstrate the land does not qualify as ag land. And this first definition essentially reads that lands classified by the NRCS as predominantly class 1 through 6 in Eastern Oregon qualify as agricultural land. However, the applicant has provided a soil study demonstrating that the property contains 71% class 7 and 8 soils, therefore does not qualify as agricultural land. Opposition state that the soil study conflicts with the determination made by the NRCS and that the land is ag land per se and therefore can't be reclassified or rezoned without a Goal 3 exception. This issue has come up before in other decisions. The hearings officer found that the county can rely on the Order 1, which is the more specific soil study, which can essentially override the NRCS soils analysis, and is able to use that to help their, to assert that the property is not ag land. And we do have the hearings officer reference some LUBA findings and some law cases, which, under state law, a soil survey certified by DLCD can be used in these proceedings. Therefore, under this definition, the hearings officer found that the subject property does not constitute agricultural land, and staff agreed with the hearings officer on this issue. And so the question at this point to the board is, under this first definition of ag land, does the subject property constitute ag land under OAR 660-3320-1AA? If no, the board can continue reviewing the applications and move to approve the plan amendment and zone change. If yes, the board must deny the plan amendment and zone change. So open to questions and happy to hear your deliberations on this matter.
Well, we talked about this 20 minutes ago. I would say the same thing, that the idea that we would replace broad-scale federal soil information with more detailed site-specific field-collected data, I think I'm totally comfortable with that, and I think that's appropriate. Taking that to the conclusion that this is not agricultural land, that I disagree with that, but I'll save that disagreement for the next item that we're looking at.
And I support the hearings officer's wording on this. It's a path that's, in the definition of the ORSs, and being able to do this soil study and being able to come to this conclusion is a known path, and the conclusion is documented. So I do support the hearings officer decision.
Okay.
And I support it also.
Great, thank you.
I grew up where we had a rocky hillside and we had another hillside, and there's such a difference. I actually reconfirmed with my family, did they ever run cows on the rocky hillside? Not very long. We definitely have a lot of rocks in Central Oregon.
Thank you, Commissioners. So I'll note that as 3 yeses on issue number 1. Moving on to number 2, the second part of the statutory definition of ag land includes land in other soil classes that is suitable for farm use as defined in ORS 215-203, taking into consideration a number of different factors, including soil fertility, suitability for grazing, climate conditions, existing and future availability of water for farm irrigation purposes, existing land use patterns, technological and energy inputs required, and accepted farming practices. And around this issue area, the applicant in their burden of proof and supplemental materials assert that the main consideration for these different factors tie back to whether the property is suitable for farm use or not. Again, taking into consideration those listed factors. And again, they reference the statutory definition of farm use, which requires land to be used for the primary purpose of obtaining a profit in money. And the applicant provided substantial evidence in the record based on poor soils, limited forage, lack of precipitation, cost of availability of irrigation water, and came to the conclusion that the production and management of a grazing operation or other farm use, the cost of that would exceed potential revenue and otherwise be impractical. Oppositional comments, and we had a lot in the record referencing a variety of different uses that folks conceived the property could be used for, and I've listed those here in the decision matrix. Hemp production, grazing, honeybees, raising poultry, lavender farms. There was a lot of examples given and testimony given in the record. Also, oppositional comments state that the applicant misinterpreted the phrase primary purpose of obtaining a profit in money, and that it ties back to the intent, the farmer's intent of obtaining a profit in money. So that was sort of the main oppositional comments. In the hearings officer recommendation, the hearings officer tied it back to really focusing on the definition of farm use. And again, that's for primary purpose of obtaining a profit in money. And the hearings officer found that the definition of farm use doesn't require the subject property to combine with other ag operations, but it focuses on the resource capability of the land itself in question. And the hearings officer concluded that based on the evidence the applicant provided, that based on the listed factors, it would severely limit the property and its capability to be utilized as a farm use. Again, tying back to ability to obtain a profit in money. And staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue. And so the question, again, here for the board today is under this second definition or second requirement for ag land, does the property constitute agriculture land? Again, if no, the board can continue reviewing the applications and move to approve the application. And if yes, the board must deny the plan amendment zone change. I'm happy to answer any questions or kind of hear your thoughts on this matter.
Yes, I'll go first again if no one else wants to talk. I would very much agree that it doesn't make any sense to try to bring water to this property and irrigate it. That said, I am not persuaded that this land could not be used for dry land grazing as a component of a viable ranching operation. There are thousands and thousands of acres of land not very different than this across eastern Oregon that are zoned EFU that are part of viable ranching operations. So it's I don't see the argument that this is not land that could be used for dry land grazing as part of a viable ranching operation. I'd also like to point out that there's a lot of juniper growing on this property, and if the productivity of the land that is going into those junipers was actually redirected into grasses and shrubs, it would be even better grazing land. There are, Commissioner Adair has been pointing this out recently, there's actually significant subsidies for implementing juniper treatments on private rangeland properties in the state of Oregon, specifically focused on eastern Oregon right now. So that's that is an opportunity that affects this whole calculation of profitability. If you can make your land more productive using mostly someone else's money, then it makes the and it makes the agricultural potential of a piece of property better, then it makes it much more feasible for you to have a profitable operation. I guess I would also say that, you know, there are a whole lot of ranching families in Eastern Oregon, you know, making a go of it on properties like this, and I can't guarantee that all of those farmers, ranchers, are making a profit, but they certainly are intending. They are doing the work with the intention of making a profit, and so the concerns of the opposition about profitability or intent to be profitable, I find persuasive. So I disagree with the hearings officer's recommendation on this point.
I support the hearings officer decision. Primary purpose of obtaining a profit in money. If it was easy to do, it would have been done. This is a long history of the current settlement, but even historical. There's just not a lot of grazing value. Water's not going to be prudent to either bring there or get there. There's the list I'm looking at from the ORSs here. The technological and energy inputs. It's a big step to get to a profit in money. So I would conclude with support the hearings officer decision.
And as I said earlier, I grew up with this example on Little Butter Creek in Eastern Oregon and the Rocky Hillside, confirming with my sister, Mary Knowles. They can barely put the cows out there. It's the Rocky Hillside. There's always rattlesnakes out there, and it's amazing. On the other side, it's smooth hills, hardly a rock, and you can graze out there for months, depending on the weather and everything. So, yeah, I agree with the hearings officer in this case.
Yeah, this property is not a hillside; it's a plateau.
Well, I've driven up to it, and it's got a lot of rocks. I mean, rocks.
Thank you, Commissioners. I've got that as 2 yes, 1 no. The next issue area is the third test, if you will, of whether property qualifies as agricultural land. And that defines ag land as land that is necessary to permit farm practices to be undertaken on adjacent or nearby agricultural lands. The applicant asserts that there's no evidence that a farm use or a farm property surrounding the subject property is relying upon the subject property for their farm use. And further, the applicant notes that the existing topography, specifically the rim rock along the western side, would prohibit the subject property from engaging with the larger farms to the west. Oppositional comments assert that the hearings officer misapplied the relevant criteria and that farming practices often involve multiple disconnected properties, and that the subject property is surrounded by farmland and other farming operations, and they reference, again, a larger grazing operation. And the hearings officer found that there's no evidence in the record showing that the subject property is necessary for farming practices on any surrounding lands, and that the subject property does not contribute to any such practices. And then the hearings officer found that the applicant provided a detailed analysis of land uses and ag properties in the general surrounding area, and that there were barriers essentially for this property to engage with other properties for farm use, specifically noting lack of irrigation, topography challenges, and the poor soils on the property. And staff agreed with the hearings officer on this issue. And so the question to the board is, does the subject property include land that is necessary to permit farm practices to be undertaken on adjacent or nearby agricultural lands, and if yes, therefore, that would constitute ag land under the OAR definition. And so again, if the answer is no to that question, the board can continue reviewing and move to approve, or if yes, the board must deny the plan amendment zone change.
So I can see that the term necessary to permit farming practices on nearby lands is the key here, and The hearings officer once again made a reasoned decision, acknowledging that there are farming practices in the vicinity, but there's nothing necessary for this parcel to be supporting those. So I support the hearings officer decision.
I would argue that commercial ranching operations, any commercial ranching operation needs a critical mass of acres to be viable. I mean, commodity beef prices are such that you just need to operate at scale. And that requires cobbling together lots of acres of land from various places, potentially under various ownerships at this point in our economic history. And removing 710 acres from that pool is actually a substantial impact to the viability of ranching as a profession or a vocation. And we specifically heard from a nearby rancher, Keystone Natural Beef, about the ways that a property like this, a lease on a property like this would be extremely helpful to their business, and could be, could help their operational viability and feasibility. So while it is, there's not someone who is currently relying on this land, using this land, it certainly doesn't mean that there's not a need for land like this for agricultural purposes.
And I agree with the hearings officer decision.
Thank you, Commissioners. The next issue area on page 4 is surrounding concerns expressed with traffic impacts for the proposed plan amendment zone change. And the applicable criteria is known as the transportation planning rule in state statute, which essentially asks whether a plan amendment zone change would have a significant effect on an existing or planned transportation facility. The applicant provided a traffic impact analysis indicating that the project, based on the max, development of under our R10 zoning standards, would not generate enough traffic that would alter the function, capacity, or performance standards of affected roadways and or affected study intersections, which there were 4 that were included in their report. The oppositional comments focus on just general traffic growth concerns. References are made to emergency access, additional wear and tear of additional vehicles on roadways, and potential for increased vehicle and wildlife collisions. The hearings officer, as well as the county's senior transportation planner, agreed with the findings of the traffic impact report, and again found that there would be no significant effect on the area roadways for the plan amendment zone change. The hearings officer also noted that future development on the property will be subject to additional transportation analysis through a land division, for example, or tentative plat land division. And so staff, agrees again, our senior transportation planner agreed with the findings in the report. And again, staff notes that, potential future road connections or street layouts aren't reviewed as part of the plan amendment zone change. That would come at a future time, and additional analysis and criteria would need to be met for safe roadways, emergency access, those types of things. And so the question for the board today is, will the plan amendment zone change have a significant effect on an existing or planned transportation facility? If no, then the board can continue reviewing the applications and move to approve the plan amendment zone change. If yes, then the board must deny the plan amendment zone change.
I would say no.
And I support the hearings officer decision on this. It is added capacity to the system if there's an approval here and some development, but the system is made for those capacity and safety improvements as these activities happen. So I support the hearings officer decision.
I reviewed the county transportation planner's analysis in detail, and I support the hearings officer's decision as well that this is not going to have significant impacts. I would like to say, though, that the county secured a pretty large federal lands access program grant for work on, to majorly upgrade Buckhorn Road a very short period of time ago. And the intention of that grant was to improve access to federal lands. But so if the proposed development in this area ends up putting a lot more people on Buckhorn Road, then it will make it difficult for it will make it difficult for me to go back to the federal government with a straight face and say, we used your dollars to improve Buckhorn Road, to improve federal, access to federal lands, when really what it's become is, a service road to a new subdivision.
Well, I actually know people that have used Buckhorn Road in the last couple months. They were driving their auto for the auto show in that community, and they knew they'd taken the wrong road. It definitely needed some federal dollars to help it. They were like, oh my gosh, but that's how Google took them, so.
Well, and the federal land isn't changing out there. This is currently privately owned, and it's going to stay privately owned, so the percentage of public and private access is not different.
Well, the ratio of public land users versus residents going on using Buckhorn Road would change with this application, and the wear and the tear on that investment that was made by the federal government with the intent to support access to federal lands will be impacted.
All right. All right, Hallie.
Thank you. Issue area 5 is in regards to the definition of forest lands. OAR defines forest lands as lands suitable for commercial forest uses, where lands necessary to permit forest operations, and other forested lands that maintain soil, air, water, fish and wildlife resources. And the state statute has sort of a methodology of how an applicant would identify lands suitable for commercial forestry uses. The applicant provided a response to this criterion, saying that the NRCS or soil study does not show soils suitable for forestry operations on the property. And also the western juniper that exists on the lot is not a species that's marketable for wood products. Oppositional comments have a general assertion that the property did not adequately address whether the property is forest land or not, subject to statewide Goal 4. The hearings officer agreed with the applicant's analysis, noting, that the subject property is not zoned for forestry use or forest lands, nor are there any within a 7-mile radius. The property has not been historically employed for forestry uses, and they don't contain merchantable tree species. And again, the NRCS does not include the soil mapping units within their forestry suitable for wood crops soil information. And so the hearings officer found that the applicant satisfied, had enough evidence that the property is not forestry land, and therefore a goal exception to Goal 4 would not be required. Staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue. So again, the question for the board is, does the subject property constitute forest lands under state statute? And if so, require an exception to Goal 4. Again, if it does not constitute forest lands, the board can continue reviewing and move to approve the plan amendment zone change. If yes, then the board must deny the plan amendment zone change.
I would say 1, if not, so we can continue on.
There's not supposed to be very many trees on this site. The fact that there are so many junipers is a, I would say a reflection of past mismanagement of what is supposed to be sage steppe, which is very suitable for use for grazing, and is also extremely important to wildlife. So I'm comfortable saying that we don't need an exception to Goal 4.
And I agree.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to page number 6. This one is regarding a Goal 14 exception, which the opposition brought up, noting that the application would require an exception to Goal 14 based on the potential number of housing units that the zone change would result in, and that the intensity of development that the zone change would allow would rise to that level of an urban scale. The applicant asserts that a Goal 14 exception is only required if the plan amendment zone change allows urban development on the property, but the RR10 designation is inherently a rural designation, and the RR10 and the rural residential exception area designations are acknowledged by our comprehensive plan and not acknowledged by the state of Oregon, that these are the appropriate designations and zoning for lands for rural residential non-agricultural lands. Again, the hearings officer found that Goal 14 was satisfied and no exception was needed. Again, the property is not within an urban growth boundary, does not involve urbanization of rural land because the RR10, again, does not permit urban scale uses. And staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue. So the question to the board this morning is, does the proposal comply with Goal 14? If yes, then an exception is not required and the board can continue reviewing. If no, then an exception to Goal 14 would be required.
So I support the hearings officer decision here, and acknowledging that the RR10 zone is the rural zone and it is in our comprehensive plan as such.
There's a lot of the county that's in RR10, and I wouldn't call that an urban use or urbanization. We should note that taking 710 acres of undeveloped land and putting 71 houses on it, probably very large houses, moves us closer to being urban than it was. But it's, I don't see, I think that this proposal complies with Goal 14.
And I agree with the hearings officer also.
Great, thank you, commissioners. Issue area number 7, this is moving into the code criteria for a zone change. And so one of the criterions is that in order to have a zone change approved, it requires a change in circumstances since the property was last zoned, or a mistake had been made in the zoning of the property in question. So under this criterion, the applicant asserts that the property, when it was first zoned EFU in the late 70s, it was just a kind of a broad brush zoning. Undeveloped rural land was zoned EFU, and there was no regard to the specific soil characteristics of the property, of this specific property and properties in general. And so the applicant asserts that based on the new Order 1, Order 2 soil study, that the property does not constitute agricultural land, and therefore the property was zoned in error. The applicant also cites a few different justifications for change in circumstances since the property was zoned, referencing the county's comprehensive plan, which has this pathway for individual property owners to seek a non-resource plan amendment and zone change. They also cite the population increase and increased housing demand in this general area since the 1980s, and then citing just the general economics of farming in the area has gotten worse. Oppositional comments state that there's no evidence that the property was mischaracterized by the county as ag land when first zoned, and that the fact that the property is surrounded by rural land, and it was when it was zoned, and it still is today, that therefore it should be, the zoning should remain the same. The hearings officer agreed with the applicant and found that there was a mistake in zoning, again, based on the new soils report, site-specific, showing that properties constitutes poor soils, and that the property, again, cannot reasonably engage in farm use with the primary purpose of obtaining a profit in money. Staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue. Again, and the question to the board is, has there been a change in circumstances since the property was last zoned, or has there been a mistake made in zoning the subject property exclusive farm use? If yes, then the board can continue reviewing the applications and move to approve. If no, then the board must deny the applications.
So the hearings officer does start out by saying a mistake was made. And I would conclude that, the terminology may be a little different that I would use, that, some of these resource lands were zoned that way as the catch-all back in the day. It was just like, it just didn't even matter. It was just land that was out there, and it wasn't, the value wasn't there in studying at the time. As I say, the hearings officer concludes the population levels, decreasing supply of rural residential lots. So, I support the hearings officer statement. I know she asked, or him or her, I guess, the hearings officer used the term mistake because of our code, but it was just the catch-all back in the day. So I support the hearings officer conclusion.
And I do also.
Yeah, and I don't think that this was a mistake. As I mentioned, there's thousands of acres of land similar to this spread across eastern Oregon that are part of working viable ranches that are zoned EFU. And I think it's reasonable to think that back in at the end of the 1970s, Deschutes County wasn't that different than the rest of eastern Oregon. And so someone looking at this property and thinking it might be a viable component of a ranch, was not unreasonable at all. So I for that reason, I actually disagree with the hearings officer's recommendation, and I would not call this a mistake.
Thank you, commissioners. And I will just note too, this criterion actually includes, it's sort of a two-part. So it either is a change in circumstances since the property was owned, or a mistake. Yeah. So I think the applicant is kind of using both, and so the hearings officer is as well to demonstrate that this is met.
Yeah, and I could speak to that as well. I mean, there has been a change in conditions. The economy of this area has diversified dramatically. The value of land for development has gone up dramatically, and I would say that speculation in converting EFU zoned lands to residential uses is severely impacting agricultural operations in the community. Yes, there have been a change in circumstances, but that doesn't mean that inherently there's not opportunities to continue to use land like this for agricultural purposes. I still don't think it's a mistake.
I might make a comment that Deschutes County actually has the shortest growing season in our state next to Wallowa County. I know that because I never get tomatoes. I always try, but we do. It's in our book. I read it in the book and I thought, well, I already knew that. I learn it every year. And I think that's one thing that's really important to note. And then you see what are we dealing with. So I feel like using both sides of the argument makes sense today.
That's why there's so many ranches in Wallowa County, because of the short growing season.
I know, that's why they take their cows and they move them out to the Forest Service to run them. But unfortunately, in Deschutes County, can I finish my statement? Thank you so much. The University of California at Davis recognized the fact that cattle grazing are incredibly impactful, especially in Eastern Oregon, for removing a lot of fire danger, the underbrush, what the cattle do, and we don't graze in our forest here in Deschutes County, but it's really a very healthy thing that has been recognized nationally through the Forest Service. So, they have to run their cows in Wallala.
Yeah, and the less viable ranching operations we have, the less people who would be around who would want to have grazing leases from the Forest Service or the BLM.
Thank you, Commissioners. We'll move on to issue number 8. And so this issue area is kind of part 2 of the zone change criteria, which asks that the impacts on surrounding land use will be consistent with the specific goals and policies contained within the comprehensive plan. And the applicant provided responses to each applicable comprehensive plan policy and their burden of proof. They cited Volwood Farms, which is the only adjoining farm, kind of large-scale commercial farm, is located to the west, and the topographical separation, again, that rim rock on the western side, will make it unlikely that the rezone will impose new or different impacts to that specific farm. And, you know, under the existing zoning, the property could accommodate up to 24 non-farm dwellings. And so while the zone change would allow more dwellings on the lot or on the property as a whole, the impacts will be the same, you know, essentially the same as imposed by 24 non-farm dwellings, as an example. Other farm uses in the area the applicant cites, you know, there's a significant distance between them and the subject property, and buffering. Oppositional comments kind of state generally that the property, you know, is surrounded by ranching and farming, and the introduction of residential development would adversely impact the character of the surrounding area. The hearings officer agreed with the applicant's findings for each of the comprehensive plan goals, and included findings as well to support that. They found that, you know, there are adjacent and nearby RR10 zoned properties to the northeast, and they have included each of those findings in the hearings officer recommendation. And staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue, specifically citing there are, you know, policies in the comprehensive plan allowing for plan amendment and zone changes for EFU lands that qualify as a non-resource land. And so the question before the board is, will the impacts of the zone change on surrounding land use on land be consistent with the specific goals and policies within the comp plan? If yes, the board can continue reviewing the applications. If no, the board must deny the plan amendment and zone change.
So with the, you know, kind of the elevation change and the plateau situation there, you know, there is the right to farm. So if somebody's out there cutting, baling, spreading fertilizer, I mean, it just looks like somebody would be looking down on it possibly from some of those locations. And there's other rural residential in the area. So I don't see, you know, impacts on existing farming operations, I guess, are my statements that I'm making right there.
This is an area where there are, you know, the general, you know, we're not talking just about the adjacent properties, but this is an area where there are large farms. There's a substantial amount of federal land, and where the residences that are currently in place really are residences in an agricultural context. So I would say that this proposal will result in significant changes to the character of this area. So I disagree, again, with the hearings officer's decision.
Well, I support the hearings officer decision as it's written.
And I support it also, the hearings officer decision.
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. Moving on to page 9. Wildlife impacts were brought up throughout the proceedings, throughout the public hearing process for this application. The applicant doesn't, or I'm sorry, the opposition does not point to specific approval criterion, but staff notes that statewide planning goal number 5 relating to natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open space may relate to this particular issue. The applicant asserts that the property does not contain any inventoried Goal 5 resources. And further, the property does not currently contain a wildlife area overlay zone, which therefore is not subject to the standards in the Deschutes County Code 18.88. They note that the county's ongoing wildlife inventory process has been paused for the time being, and the applicant is not, required to be, is not subject to the potential any Goal 5 overlays that may or may not be placed on the property. And oppositional comments, and we received some from many folks, citing just general kind of perceived wildlife that's on the property and wanting to preserve that for those types of uses. We also got a comment from Department of Fish and Wildlife, stating that their designated mule deer and elk winter range is present in this area, and this property is recommended for inclusion in the county's Goal 5 wildlife update. And lastly, Department of Fish and Wildlife also asserts that possible groundwater pumping in this region could impact fish and wildlife resources within the Deschutes River system. Hearings officer agreed with the applicant. Currently the property does not contain any inventoried Goal 5 resources or contain the wildlife area overlay, and there's no specific development at hand at this point, so specific impacts wouldn't be evaluated at this time. And any other wildlife protections again have to be sanctioned by the county's Goal 5 EC analysis and WA zone and overlay process. And staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue. Obviously the wildlife area process is not yet completed. As it is today, the property does not contain that overlay zone. And so, can't necessarily speak to future development on the land, but again, for this application at this time, that WA overlay does not apply. And so the question before the board is regarding Goal 5. Is the application consistent with Goal 5 in regards to natural resources, scenic historic areas, and open space? Again, if yes, then an exception to Goal 5 is not required and the board can continue reviewing. And if no, then an exception to Goal 5 would be required and the board would have to deny the application.
I guess I'd like to say that the deer and elk don't know what the wildlife area overlay map looks like. And so they may not have gotten the memo that this is an important area to them. This is critically important winter range habitat as identified by our inventory update process. And our mule deer populations in the county, particularly in North County, are crashing. And I'm very concerned about the impacts that this proposed application would have on those resources, on those Goal 5 resources. So I disagree with the hearings officer's opinion on this. I guess I'd also like to say that someday I hope our wildlife area zone overlay catches up with our land use processes. I know that our community development department has some substantial capacity constraints to be able to deliver on that. But I also would say that my two colleagues have been all too eager to continue to postpone the completion of that project. So there's, I have concerns that, conceivably our overlay is never going to catch up with our land use planning processes. Given that, we need to protect Goal 5 resources in whatever way we can.
So I see this very differently. This is there's open fields for agriculture within the vicinity. There's prime migration routes for herd animals to eat all they want. I got to imagine. So I'm going to talk about a future vision here. If there's rural residential, one home on a 10-acre parcel, they're going to leave the field and they're going to come up and have their flowers on the front porch for dessert. It's a positive environment for the deer. I live in an area where there's deer and elk all over the place. Doesn't matter what your fences are, they just jump in and jump out all over the place. So I'm real supportive. I do support the hearings officer decision here, but also if it was in a Goal 5 inventoried area, I don't see a direct conflict there, especially with this rural type setting. Herds of elk and deer could be very, very happy there. Even having a little bit of open water, just a bird bath once in a while could be very beneficial to some of those herds. Looking towards a future inventory, it was mentioned to me that just buying deer chow, like food for the animals, or putting in a bucket is really one of the bad situations. It's much better that they just graze instead of being nose to nose in a bucket or a trough. That's where they share diseases or whatever. So just having open grazing is good, and I see it as very much compatible with that RR10 zoning.
And I will agree with the hearings officer, and I also want to make note that I was personally sent pictures of 3 wolves that were down on Lower Bridge in this area. And you've seen where we've got a pack now perhaps designated in Warm Springs. We've got another mother with, 4 or 5 babies in South County. And then there's a group here around Metolius. So I would really like to know, what is the cougar population? They were killing sheep in my neighborhood. And I know that there will be rules if this zone is added into it. There will be specific rules for fencing, and it's amazing how they can go over my fencing or they go under my fencing. And the elk in my neighborhood don't seem to really care if there is fencing, because they're pretty powerful. So I feel like this is I can agree with the hearings officer. There are other things out there that I think are incredibly going to be more impactful. The cougar population in the state has increased immensely.
Thank you, commissioners. Moving on to page 10. Fire hazard was also discussed a lot as part of the hearing, as part of the proceedings. The opponents didn't point to a specific approval criterion, but we do have statewide planning goal 7, which pertains to natural disasters and hazards that relate to this particular issue. And the applicant, in their burden of proof, states that goal 7 is not applicable because the subject property is not located in an area recognized in the comprehensive plan as a known natural disaster hazard area. The applicant also had testified that they have engaged with a wildfire consultant and would implement mitigation measures to limb and remove specific juniper trees and overall maintenance on the property. And again, oppositional comments just kind of generally point to more housing in the area, possibly increasing costs to wildfire suppression and wildfire fighting costs. And that additional landscape fragmentation, again, might impact costs and risk associated with wildfire. And the hearings officer found that the application doesn't change the existing wildfire hazard area designation that is applicable on this property and essentially the entirety of Deschutes County. And the hearings officer notes that the property is within the Redmond Fire and Rescue Tax District, and so any future development activities on the property would need to coordinate with Redmond Fire and Rescue for access roadways, any firefighting mitigation requirements that may be required. Staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue. Again, the zone change does not alter the wildfire hazard area designation. The property is not within any floodplain hazard areas either. And so again, any future land use applications, subdivisions Redmond Fire and Rescue would be notified, would have input on making sure their requirements are met for emergency access. So the question for the board is the application consistent with Goal 7 in regards to wildfire hazards? If yes, then an exception is not required. If no, then an exception to Goal 7 would be required, and the board would need to deny the application.
I would say yes. I'm agreeing with the hearings officer.
I think the data that would speak to this would be both the draft Senate Bill 762 wildfire hazard maps that are being developed, and also the maps that the county had developed prior to the SB 760, prior to the passage of SB 762, when we were trying to evaluate high and extreme fire risk independently on our own. And unfortunately, I don't know. Like I haven't looked at either of those maps recently to be able to say whether this is classified as a high or extreme risk area or not. But I would like to actually know that before we make a determination on this question.
Yeah, and I can certainly, if look into that. I have our planning manager is here as well to answer questions about that process. Let's see.
Well,
we can look.
If I had thought of this earlier, we could. We could have dragged Kyle in here.
Good afternoon. For the record, Will Groves, your planning manager. This is a great question about the 762 fire maps. The latest guidance from the state shows that those are going to be, late 2023 is the target for those to be rolled out again. And so those currently have no status. It certainly would be interesting as trying to evaluate fire hazard on the property, particularly in the face of a future development. But at this time, that mapping was withdrawn, so there's nothing to hang our hat on with regard to that mapping.
Yeah, there will be drafts out in March, and that's why my fallback was to say, it would be great to see the maps, some of the different maps that were developed by the advisory committee that was constituted by the county back in the day before SB 762 had even been passed. Which, is there any way to pull that information up?
Well, so it's important at this point in deliberations, because the record's closed, to not introduce material to which parties aren't able to comment or argue. So unless the board wanted to take a position to reopen the record specifically to allow argumentation on it, we couldn't introduce it at this time.
According to the notes, it says the hearings officer found that the application does not change the wildfire hazard area designation that is applicable to the property and the entirety of Deschutes County. We know we live in a wildfire zone.
So yeah, I'm supportive of the hearings officer conclusion here. Any future development will be done with, new construction techniques in the environment, understanding of wildfire risks, best practices for construction and defensible space. We don't need more analysis by government to tell people what to do and how to do it. So I'm supportive of the hearings officer statement there.
And so am I.
In the absence of data, I don't feel comfortable expressing support or opposition to the hearings officer's decision on this.
Thank you, commissioners, and we'll move on to issue 11. This issue area is regarding potential groundwater impacts, which again were brought up many times by the opposition in the testimony for this application. And there's not a specific, the opposition does not point to a specific approval criterion related to this. However, staff notes that Deschutes County Code Section 18136.020, which is another requirement for a zone change, is regarding the current availability of necessary public services and facilities to the subject property in question. And so the applicant provided well logs as part of their application materials, citing a variety of different depths ranging from 240 feet up to about 490 feet. And that's essentially their evidence and proof that water is available to the subject property. The applicant also provided some technical and expert analysis, the GSI Water Solutions groundwater use evaluation, which is in the record and asserted that the proposed use of up to 71 homes, which again isn't before the county at this time, but they wanted to include that to show that the study showed that there would be little to no measurable interference with existing uses due to the high permeability of the aquifer material and low pumping rates from domestic wells. And again, oppositional comments sort of generally assert that there would be a threat to the groundwater table in the area. Many folks cited their wells and the having to deepen their specific wells. And there's a lot of data and information kind of expressed through the proceedings about water depths and wells. But the hearings officer found that, the specific water availability and how that'll be provided is addressed at the time of a development on the property, and that the criterion simply asks that is there water available? Are the necessary public facilities currently available to the subject property? And the hearings officer notes that, without adequate water availability, that may, limit what can be done on this property. But that's not an analysis that's occurring at this time. Again, it's just the zone change as opposed to a development of the site. And the hearings officer found that the well logs indicated that water is available in the area. Staff agrees with the hearings officer on this issue, and again notes that the criterion asks about the availability of water to the subject property and not necessarily to surrounding landowners. And so the question today for the board is, will changing the zoning serve the public health, safety, and welfare in considering the availability and efficiency of providing necessary public services and facilities to the uses allowed by the zone change? Again, if yes, the board can continue reviewing the applications. If no, then the board must deny the applications.
Can I ask what kind of system and usage was assumed to be able to make the determination that there is water available?
I think they looked at well logs, which would be the RR10 zoning. I think they would obviously need to install individual wells to each of the lots that would potentially be created. And so the well logs essentially demonstrate that surrounding properties do have access to water, and therefore that would be available on the subject property as well.
At X depths.
Yeah.
So they assumed 71 exempt wells.
In their groundwater study, I believe so. Yeah, and I'll pull that up right now just to triple check.
I know he was explaining that household use is rather insignificant compared to trying to raise alfalfa or something. The water use for agriculture could be huge, but when you're allowed to build a house, you're only allowed to do a half an acre of landscaping around it to be taken care of by that well. But I believe Mr. Gorman's numbers for his personal residence in the summer when he was watering his lawn went up significantly, but then the rest of the year it was rather minimal for just home use.
Landscaping is the biggest piece of residential use. I would agree that 71 exempt wells is probably a lot less water use than trying to put in wells to irrigate this property and use as farmland. But I don't know whether 71 exempt wells is more water use than dryland grazing of the site. We certainly know that groundwater levels in the lower bridge area are declining. We heard reports from a number of nearby landowners that their wells, that they have seen wells go dry. So I think that there are substantial concerns about groundwater use in this area. Definitely, like in the context of the whole basin, municipal, residential, domestic use is only a very small portion of the total water use in the Deschutes Basin. but it can have localized impacts on adjacent property owners, and that's that's something that I hope we would more thoroughly evaluate before approving any specific development, and it's a cause for concern for me. I generally have concerns about exempt wells because they they authorize a certain amount of use, and then there is absolutely no mechanism to measure whether people are complying with their 15,000 gallon, I believe it's a 15,000 gallon per day cap, or not. And if you can't measure it, then you can't accurately predict what the impacts are going to be. And if you can't measure it, you also can't ensure that people are using their authorized allowance or not. So I don't feel like we have adequate, sufficient information to really evaluate whether the hearings officer has made an appropriate decision or not on this issue. So I will disagree.
I support what the hearings officer's conclusions and words are. The water is coordinated by the state. There's going to be an application for that well. The well's logs and wells approvals are all managed by the state of Oregon. So as a Deschutes County Board of Commission, I support us acknowledging it. There's information in the record about the minimal effect documented. Kyle Gorman started off by saying we live with a very robust aquifer. And yes, if a well goes dry, it's very impactful to that family. But we're not in a spot to make. I don't support making it a hard decision for a denial on a decision space that's outside of Deschutes County. So I support the hearings officer's statement there.
It is interesting that Kyle did cite the 9-foot decline in 25 years, and we've had, 5 years of serious drought. Hopefully, I know we need more than 1 year's recovery, but hopefully we will have a recovery there. And I do know I think the second best well in the state is in that area, which is phenomenal to know. So I will agree with the hearings officer. I do think the state, though, needs to do a better job. When you're given that exempt well permit, you need to have to report. And I believe that department could step up and do a better job. So.
Well, that's pretty controversial. Talking about metering those wells is, big water statement to do that. If you think about it, if somebody has a domestic well like that, an exempt well, and they're running it all the time, that water has to go somewhere, and it's probably not going up in the air. So even if it's going into the ground, you would know it. If there was multiple acres of green, that's probably way out of bounds. But if there isn't, you're just wasting energy pumping it, and I don't know where, just be going back into the ground. Well, unless you're trying to sell it, which would be illegal too. So, yeah.
Well, if you're watering during the day and it's 100 degrees out, it's half of it is evaporating. So that's the other side of it. But yeah, it would turn up green on Google. So excessive green over your half acre.
I just wanted to say that we have had multiple years of drought, and that may continue if climate change is real. And that is the major reason for groundwater declines in our area. 5/8 of the issue with the groundwater level decreases we've seen in the Deschutes Basin are climate related. That said, when that happens, it leaves that much less water for all of the people who have straws in the ground to draw from, and it means that each additional well that you add has that much more potential to impact the people around them. So it's this is a real concern.
So the next step is, if climate change is real, poles are melting, more water in the atmosphere. We are going to have so much water we're not going to know what to do with it someday, and that's happening all around the world. So I can't imagine that climate change means the whole world's going to dry. I think climate change means the whole world's going to get more wet. So yes, we're in a dry spell right now, but I'm just pointing out that there's a whole flip side to that argument that you just made, that it's coming. The water's coming.
There's some pretty good models of what climate change will do locally, globally, in local areas, in other places. And it's not going to get more wet here. What we are going to see is a whole lot less snow and a whole lot more rain. And when you have a whole lot less snow, a whole lot less water goes into the ground. And we are highly...
More water means more water.
Yeah, more water raging down the Deschutes River in the middle
Percolating
of winter.
into the ground.
No, you know, when you get a type 2 rainstorm, like extremely intense rainfall in a short period of time, a whole lot more water runs off.
The whole eastern Cascades, we live at the base of that. The water is going to run into the ground somewhere between the peak of the Cascades and my backyard. I think we're going to have so much water we don't know what to do with it. So I'm just pointing out there's different views of this.
We will have water at moments when we can't do anything with it. It's called flooding.
It's going to go into the groundwater.
That's when you work on your water storage.
Yeah.
But
So I'm just pointing out that, you know, it's isn't all doom and gloom.
If it doesn't come as snow and
It doesn't
melt
get put in
slowly,
Wiki Up and it
then
doesn't go through irrigators, but it'll go in the
If it doesn't come as
ground.
snow and melt slowly, it doesn't not as much percolates into the ground and recharges groundwater. More runs off.
There's a different view of that. Just acknowledging that.
I would encourage you to talk to some of the people who, from the Oregon Water Resources Department, or from, you know, the Deschutes River Conservancy or other places who have a little bit better understanding of this issue and the dynamics of groundwater recharge.
Well, I'm pointing out water,
In
volume
places
of
that
water is going to go somewhere.
If flooding increases, if you don't have reservoir capacity, there's no place.
That's for irrigation systems, that's not groundwater.
Our friends in Tillamook County who have massive flooding problems, right? You know, they've got plenty of water, but how much usable water do they have? You know, there's still community water systems in Tillamook County that are really struggling right now.
Okay, well, I would mention that we get 11 inches of rain currently a year. That's our average. And getting rid of junipers is an excellent idea.
There we go.
So, just to put my statement in the record, thank you very much. Yeah, they suck up, 30 to 50 gallons a day. So, Holly, here we are.
Commissioners, so we'll move on to last issue, issue number 12. And this issue was brought up kind of after the hearings officer recommendation was issued by Central Oregon Land Watch. And it's in regards to House Bill 2229, which was adopted in 2009 and is essentially, it's known as the Big Look Bill, which it describes circumstances under which counties can initiate a redesignation for ag and forest land by initiating a non-resource plan amendment. And it's really where a county elects to do a county-wide review of resource designations and then basically go through a re-acknowledgement process with DLCD to address potential mapping errors in designations of farmlands and forest lands. And the applicant responded to the opponent's testimony saying that the House Bill 2229 is not applicable to this specific quasi-judicial proceeding because it only relates to county-led legislative processes and has no bearing on a quasi-judicial rezone initiated by an individual property owner. And again, the Deschutes County Comp Plan supports the rezoning of an individual parcel through the comprehensive plan and through the process that the applicant has done. Again, the Central Oregon Land Watch asserts that this application is not compliant with House Bill 2229 and that a work plan supported by DLCD has to be obtained through this House Bill process. And they claim that that has not been done. Again, hearings officer did not address this issue, but staff discussed this with legal counsel, and we agree with the applicant on this issue. Again, this was a House Bill 2229. It was something for a county to initiate a big look of ag land and then initiate a rezone on those. And in the 7 years since this House bill was enacted and passed, the county has considered many property-specific applications, and there's nothing in this House bill that precludes, again, an individual property owner from applying or the county from considering an application. And so the question to the board is, does House Bill 2229 apply to this application for a plan amendment and zone change? If no, the board can continue reviewing and move to approve. If yes, then the board must deny the plan amendment zone change.
I think that individual property owners should have the opportunity to apply for these plan amendments and zone changes. I do not necessarily support this specific one, but you know, as a principle, I think it's I'd support the hearings officer's decision.
Well, and this will be a new decision that we're going to add with the applicant's input, so I do support that position.
And I also.
Okay, great. Thank you, commissioners. And that wraps up my issue area. I think at this point, I'll take some guidance from legal counsel, but I think the next step, you know, unless the commissioners had any other questions or discussion points, but I think the next step is to take a vote on the applications. Again, in each of these issue areas, we had a majority support the hearings officer decision on each of those items.
Okay, I see we have Dave Doyle.
Dave Doyle, County Counsel. Hallie hit it right on the nose. This would be a time for a motion to approve file number, and it's listed there on the agenda, the two file numbers, but would recommend that you make a motion on that and vote.
So yeah, it's a good discussion today. Thank you very much for putting the matrix together. You know, a lot of studying from the original hearings officer decision, the applicant, and the you know, a hearing in front of us. So with that, I'll move. Well, so now I did this last time. So accepting hearings officer recommendation. There we go. For land use file 247211043-PA and 1044-ZC.
Okay, I will second it as chair. Any further discussion? Okay.
I'll just say again, we've been down the well-beaten rabbit trails to approve applications, but I do not think that the intent of the state land use planning system is honored by a yes vote on this application. I have concerns about the impacts of this proposal on wildlife habitat, on the viability of farming and particularly ranching in our community. I particularly concerned about the scale of this proposal, this application, and you know, certainly there are water questions that need to be answered, and community wildfire protection questions that need to be answered as well. So that's my statement on why I will be voting no on this proposal.
So, and I would assert that there's people that see this as the optimal use of that land. Our state land use system is in place. There's a great vision of having urban areas, but I've also met people in, you know, the densely populated areas of our state that are looking forward to the day they can go live in the rural on a few acres. And if we don't allow that anywhere, that's possibly not the intention of, you know, the people, you know, a majority. So there's different visions on that.
We have tens of thousands of rural residential properties in Deschutes County, and we have thousands of vacant rural residential properties already in Deschutes County. The argument that when we heard public testimony on this application, there were a lot of people saying that we really need more housing, and we absolutely need more housing in Deschutes County, but the particular type of housing that we really need is affordable housing. And I do not see how creating a number of $1 million+ homes on large 10-acre lots does anything to help us address our affordable housing crisis in Deschutes County.
Well, if we have more taxable land, there's going to be a more tax base, so then the government can provide more resources into people that need the housing. So that keeps a vibrant economy, a vibrant path for people that are willing to work hard, be able to build that house and pay those taxes, which is going to help the whole system.
Yeah.
So instead of riding it down,
Tell me how we're using our property tax base right now to address housing affordability. The only investments I've seen us make in affordable housing recently were with other people's money, with federal dollars that were provided to us through the American Rescue Plan.
I think we're in the middle of a motion, and we could go on and on.
Let's talk about habitat designation of county land in South County. Yes, I think we've done some really good things. So, there's a balance to it. And yes, the money can circle around. Definitely, I appreciate that Kyle Gorman was part of the conversation, having him come in and clearly, point out that the 9-foot drop in 25 years. You would have thought, because I know that we have neighbors in the community that are really, have issues. But, this is 71 exempt wells and hopefully, with half acres. It seems like it's housing on all sides. So we're doing a lot of things, and I acknowledge that. So the vote is Commissioner DeBonne,
I vote yes.
Commissioner Chang,
No.
and the chair votes yes.
And I'll just say again, this is 710 acres of lost habitat, increased wildfire risk, reduced groundwater supply for 71 homes in a price bracket that is not urgently needed for our community.
Okay, so.
Thank you, Commissioners. And staff will be back with a draft decision and ordinance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hallie.
I got it.
Sally, Hallie.
I practiced. I was sitting
Thank you so
here
much.
Trying to be proper. Anyway, thank you so much. And we have one more item on the agenda. Should we go ahead and do that now?
Yep.
Sure. Chair Adair, before you, we have order number 2022-055 to designate our new Chief Financial Officer, Robert Tintle, as with the responsibilities and position of Deschutes County Tax Collector effective today, September 18th, 2022.
28th?
September 28th, 2022.
Okay.
And that is the treasurer position, which will have someone running for office. We do have people running for office for that.
We do have people running for office for treasurer. This is separate. This is for the position of tax collector.
Tax collector.
So tax collector is not a duty under the treasurer?
Correct. Correct. Treasurer is addresses the county's investments.
Okay, well, thanks for that clarity. I didn't know which way that went.
Okay. So do we have any discussion?
I'd like to, welcome Robert Tintle. And we said hi to him this last meeting, and I'm supportive of order number, and I'll make a motion in support of board signature on order number 2022-055, appointing Robert Tintle as tax collector.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner Chang?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So thank you very much for that. Do we have any executive this afternoon?
I'm not aware of any executive sessions, but it appears Whitney has another item.
Oh, I have another item also.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Okay, other item.
I do have another item. It's been brought to my attention that Home Depot, their foundation, their employees have been outstanding members of the Deschutes County community. They've donated, I believe, about $200,000 this year alone for amazing projects throughout the community. 75 of the people that work at Home Depot were actually helping with the Sleep in Heavenly Peace project the other day, where they were making bed frames, and they had all the bed frames, and then they had mattress and things for people children who've never had a real bed before. So all the work that they've done, I'd love to have like a proclamation or a resolution to acknowledge their support of our community. I think it's really a really positive statement, and I thank Home Depot.
So you're proposing we bring something like that back
Right,
at this
yes,
time, or?
Yes. I have the letter that said all the different groups they've helped. It's unbelievable. But they've given about $200,000.
Well, and I'm excited about the efforts they've done. I'm hesitant to support naming a specific company and effort, just because we're all in that spot, as a county proclamation.
Yeah, I mean, doing a proclamation, there's a lot of other people who we should do a proclamation for. If you want to write a letter,
Yeah, a letter. There
I'd
you
be
go.
happy to sign a letter.
Yeah, so let's acknowledge, but yeah, I'm just,
Okay, then
there we go. How about that?
and I'll make my personal proclamation. Thank
There you
very
go.
much, Home Depot. No, really, guys, when we lose local management, like when Les Schwab got bought out by somebody else, what actually happens to the local community? And I feel like Home Depot is not centered here, corporately, but they make a difference. So thank you.
Yeah, but please, a letter would be good.
Okay, let's
Here we go.
get a sweet letter.
Work that one out.
Thank you, guys. All right, so any other items? Whitney, you have something?
One
Art.
other thing I would add is that groundwater allocation public meeting with the Oregon Water Resources Department is tonight. So if you want to share your theories with them about how there's plenty of water, that you're more than welcome to go and express your opinions there. I'll be going to express concerns about exempt wells and about the future of our groundwater mitigation program in the Deschutes Basin.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, Whitney?
Commissioners, just a quick other item. As we start to prepare for the upcoming legislative session, you likely saw that we've placed a hold on your calendars for Friday, October 14th for our legislative kickoff with Northwest Policy Advocates. They've requested time to meet both with the board and department heads to talk about preparing for the legislative session, understanding potential county priorities, and really hearing from the board as well as staff that are engaged in legislative issues about things that might be on the horizon for us. So just wanted to check in with you on a couple of things. One, your preference for an in-person meeting versus a hybrid or a virtual meeting. That was one question that will help their team plan as they prepare for this meeting. I know it's often easier for staff sometimes when we do at least offer the hybrid option, so they're able to Zoom in from wherever they may be, but wanted to check in with the board on your preference for how we might structure that initial kickoff.
Well, so we think of this as a work session type meeting with all three commissioners?
Yes.
We're kind of we're under requirement to have a open public meeting anyways.
Yep.
and
It's
minutes.
just a question of if you'd rather be at your desks, as we've sometimes done for our legislative meetings, or here in the room potentially, and to have Doug attend in person. It's really the board.
Oh, I see.
So it's
So we could all just go virtual?
It's scheduled for 1 p.m.
Correct.
And are they going to be in the area?
They're offering, and I wanted to connect with you early so they could plan ahead for
Okay.
travel and other things, if the board would prefer to be in the room. And
I think it would be
Yeah, let's aim
excellent.
at getting in the room together if possible, so we
And
can
it's
all.
not It's not Friday the 13th.
It is not.
October 14th, so that sounds like a great idea.
Okay, perfect. So we'll plan on that, and then just to get the board kind of thinking and to share staff's plans. Usually we have departments come prepared to talk about legislative concepts they're aware of that may impact operations, and also talk about any potential priorities that they may have and want to discuss with the board. If there's any other direction or information that you'd like us to provide to departments that would be helpful for you as we prepare for the meeting on the 14th, we're certainly happy to discuss that with you individually or today, but just wanted to kind of have you, have us be as prepared as we can be as we head into that meeting.
So yeah, any of those foundational topics that have been going on year after year, sometimes I just remember like the investment in foundational public health efforts. That was a session item.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's something like that that pops up that's, going to have, its next phase, I guess is what I'm thinking here. Because with the new governor and the balance in the legislature, who knows what's exactly going to happen here. So we need to be ready for a lot of dynamic leadership at that point, I guess. So, but yeah, anything that's bubbling up from departments, I'd love to hear about. I want to be an advocate for.
I know, I just heard that gas prices jumped 50 cents, but Oregon's jump was the most in the nation. So why was ours the most? Yeah. Maybe the legislature can answer that question.
The aid and assist issues that are coming up in light of is it the Mossman decision? Is that the judge's name? I think are a significant concern in terms of our state legislative docket. Our agenda this year, and I also think that it would be really helpful to talk with Northwest policy advocates about Measure 110. I think we, probably across the dais here, you have a diversity of opinions on what's going to happen and what we should be doing about Measure 110. And it would be actually very helpful from my perspective to hear from someone like Doug what realistically will probably happen with Measure 110, so that we can be plugging into the most effective efforts to accomplish our goals.
That's great. Perfect. Well, we'll move forward with preparing for the 14th, and if anything else comes to mind between now and then, feel free to let me know.
Thank you, Whitney. Thank you for being multi-talented today. You definitely answered the call. Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Meeting is adjourned until next Monday afternoon at 1.
Okay.